wherever you are right now, letting this play in the background while you rest, or work, or simply wonder. Welcome. Tonight, we begin the longest journey in human history. The story of the longest walk. The story of when we first left our home and crossed the world. This is Midnight Sapien, a quiet space for minds that are still listening, long after the rest of the world has gone silent. Before we begin, consider this. For almost all of our history, the human world was small. For millions of years, entire continents lay silent, untouched by a single human footprint. Then, just a few thousand generations ago, a small band of our ancestors began to walk. They carried the future of all humanity in their footsteps, and they would not stop until they had made the entire planet their home. This is their story, our story. So go ahead, dim the lights. Let the noise of the modern world fade, just for a little while. You don't need to take notes. You only need to be here. I often wonder where this story is being heard. What time is it for you, right now, as you listen to a story from a time before maps and before clocks? If you feel like sharing, I'd love to know in the comments. It is a quiet reminder that we are all listening to this story together. If this kind of slow, deep storytelling brings you a little bit of calm or a little bit of wonder, consider liking the video and subscribing. That small click helps other quiet minds find this space. A signal that slow, thoughtful science still has a home here. And, as always, if the story carries you into sleep tonight, that is perfectly okay. I've left chapters in the description below, so you can always find your place again when you return. Because this is a story about endurance. It can wait for you. Now, let us begin the walk. Before the walk, there was a world of stillness, a world of circles. The sun rose and fell in a slow, patient rhythm. The seasons turned, the dry giving way to the wet giving way to the dry. And for 100,000 years, the human world was small, held together by memory and by fire. This was the only world our ancestors knew. The great, warm heartland of Africa. This was not a waiting room for history. It was the entire universe. A landscape of immense, living memory, where every rock and river held a story. These were our people, Homo sapiens. Already us, and not yet us. Their bones were our bones, slender and built for the heat of the savannah. Their brains were our brains, large and full of a quiet, growing potential. They were a people of the earth, their knowledge held not in books, but in the calluses on their feet, and in the stories whispered from one generation to the next. But to truly understand their world, we must step inside that circle. Let us imagine one of those mornings, long before the Great Walk began. You wake not to an alarm, but to a change in the light, a soft, grey wash that spills over the horizon, chasing the last of the stars from the sky. The air on your skin is cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and the lingering sweet smoke from last night's fire. Around you, the quiet sounds of your kin begin to stir. A soft murmur of voices speaking a language made of clicks and whispers. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone, as a tool is sharpened for the day ahead. Your world is small, warm, and immediate. It is the circle of firelight, the faces you have known since birth, and the vast, silent land that waits just beyond the edge of the camp. This is your home, not a place of maps and borders, but a rhythm, a memory of where the water can be found, where the best tubers grow, where the great herds of antelope pass in the dusty twilight. This knowledge was their inheritance. Theirs was a world of profound, practical skill. The tools of this era, what archaeologists call the Middle Stone Age, were a universe away from the crude choppers of their distant ancestors. These were composite tools, born from a mind that could see a future object in separate pieces. They learned to strike a stone core with such precision that they could produce a perfectly shaped blade, a flake of flint or obsidian with a lethal, predictable edge. This was the Levallois technique, a kind of Stone Age geometry, requiring foresight, planning, and a deep intuitive understanding of how stone fractures. This knowledge was not taught in words. It was learned by watching, by mimicking the movements of your elders, your hands slowly learning the silent language of stone. These sharp stone points were then set into wooden shafts, bound with plant fiber and sealed with a sticky, powerful adhesive made from tree resin. The result was a spear. Not just a sharpened stick, but a balanced, deadly, and reliable weapon. A technology that was the product of 3 different materials and a single, unifying idea. But there are other objects in the camp, things that serve no purpose for the hunt or for the meal. A collection of seashells, carried from a distant coast hundreds of kilometers away, each one pierced with a small, deliberate hole. A piece of soft, red ochre, a stone rich in iron, has been ground into a sparkling powder, ready to be mixed with fat and smeared onto skin. Another piece has been scratched with a pattern of intersecting lines, a mark that means nothing and everything. This is the beginning of a new kind of mind. A mind that is no longer just surviving in the world, but is beginning to make a map of it, a map of meaning. These small, unnecessary acts of beauty, these first, fragile symbols, are the seeds of everything that is to come. A string of beads is not just an ornament. It is a signal of identity, a language of belonging. It tells a stranger from another band who you are, what river you belong to, what stories you carry. In a world that would soon be defined by stress and scarcity, the need to know who is kin and who is other was becoming a matter of life and death. The entire life of these people was a web of such connections. Their strength was the strength of the group. The band was rarely more than a few dozen people. A tight, interwoven network of parents, children, cousins, and kin. The food from a successful hunt was not yours alone. It belonged to the band. It was shared around the fire. The elders eating first, then the children, then the rest. This was the rule. Not a law written in stone, but a rhythm of survival, so deep and so old that no one would ever think to question it. Because you knew, in your bones, that you could not survive alone. And then, the world began to change. The change was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow turning of a screw, a quiet tightening of the landscape. You feel it in the heat of the day. The sun is a different kind of hot now, a white, glaring heat that bleaches the colour from the sky. The familiar shade of the acacia trees feels thin, offering less relief. The long grass, once a sea of gold, is now brittle and pale, crunching under your feet. And there is the dust. A fine, reddish powder that settles on everything. A constant, gritty taste in the back of your throat. The great river, the lifeblood of your people for generations, is a different river this season. It is slower, shallower. The banks of dark, rich mud are wider now, cracked and dry in the sun. The animals that come to drink are thinner, their ribs showing through their hides. They are wary, their ears constantly turning, listening for a danger that is not a lion, but the vast, growing silence of the land itself. The old rhythms are breaking. The stories the elders tell of endless rain and great herds, they begin to feel like tales from another world. This was the cradle that shaped us, a world of intense social connection and growing ecological stress, a world of sophisticated, practical skill, and the birth of a fragile, symbolic mind. It was a world of deep, ancient stability that was beginning to tremble. For now, the people endured. They walked a little farther to find water. They dug a little deeper for roots. They read the subtle, changing signs of the land with a new and sharper focus. This was still the only world they had ever known, and they did not yet dream of leaving it. Why would they? Every story you have ever heard happened here. Every ancestor you have ever known is buried in this soil. This was the center of the human world. But the center could not hold. A force far older than any human memory was beginning to unmake their world a great thirst, falling over the land itself. That great thirst did not arrive all at once. It was not a single, terrible year without rain. It was a slow unravelling, a quiet withdrawal of grace that lasted for 30,000 years. The great engine of the African monsoons, the pulse of wet air from the oceans that had watered the continent for eons, began to sputter. The reasons were cosmic, written in the slow, indifferent wobble of the Earth's orbit. The planet was tilting away from warmth, and as the northern ice sheets began their slow, invisible growth, the rain belts across the equator shifted and then weakened. This was the coming of a new geological age, a period of intense cold and dryness that scientists now call marine isotope stage 4. But our ancestors had no names for it. They only had the evidence of their senses, the slow, creeping failure of the world. Let us stand with them for a moment, on a high rock, looking out. You see a valley that was once green. You remember the stories of the elders, of a great lake that shimmered here, so wide you could not see the other side. But now, all you see is a vast, white pan of cracked salt glittering under a merciless sun. The herds of zebra and wildebeest that once gathered at its shores are gone. The flocks of birds that filled the air with their calls are silent. The lake is a ghost, a memory of water. The forests, too, began to retreat. The familiar woodlands that provided shade and fruit and safety began to shrink, pulling back into high mountain valleys. In their place came a hardier, thornier world, a world of scrubland and desert. The very earth was changing its skin. For the small bands of humans scattered across the continent, this was a slow-motion catastrophe. The old maps of memory, the stories that told where to find water, where to find food, were becoming lies. Imagine what it felt like. You arrive at the riverbed your grandmother spoke of, the place of the cool, deep pools. But the river is gone. Only a scar of cracked mud and bleached stones remains. The fish are bones, buried in the dust. The pressure was immense. As the oases vanished and the grasslands turned to sand, human populations were pushed into smaller and smaller refuges, places where a stubborn spring still flowed from the rock, or a high mountain range still caught a whisper of rain. Genetic evidence tells a story of this time, a story of a great bottleneck. The human species, once spread across a continent, was reduced to just a few thousand breeding individuals. We almost didn't make it. For a time, our entire future flickered like a dying ember, a single fragile species, cornered by a changing climate. But this pressure did not just break us. It also forged us. In these isolated pockets of survival, something new began to emerge. The need for innovation was no longer a choice. It was a command. Tools became smaller, more efficient, designed to get the most out of every resource. Every scrap of hide, every shard of bone was used and reused, and the social world became more important than ever. The bonds of kinship, the rules of sharing, these were the difference between life and death. Bands of people had to trust each other more deeply, and they had to connect with other bands. The seashells and the scratched pieces of ochre were no longer just symbols. They were a lifeline, a network, a way of sending a message across 100 kilometers of hostile, drying land. A message that said, "We are still here. We are kin. We remember you." Long-distance trade, not of goods, but of trust, was born in the crucible of this great drought. And it was in this time that many of our ancestors were pushed toward the last great refuge, the one place where the drought's grip was weaker, the sea. All along the southern coast of Africa, from the Cape to the Horn, archaeological sites show a new and intense focus on the ocean. Here, even when the rains failed, the sea still provided. The rhythm of the tides brought a daily harvest of shellfish, mussels, limpets, abalone. The cold, nutrient-rich currents supported seals and seabirds. The ocean was a larder that never went empty. This was a new way of life to learn. A life spent reading the moon, not for the seasons of the land, but for the turning of the tide. A life spent cracking open the hard shells to get at the soft meat inside. Their entire world shrank to the narrow, vibrant line between the land and the water. This was not an easy life, but it was a possible one. A life of patience, of watching, and of waiting. And in this coastal world, the human mind took another crucial step. The shellfish and the fatty fish of the cold ocean currents were rich in omega-3 fatty acids, the essential building blocks for a complex brain. It is possible that this forced turn to the sea was the final nutritional trigger that pushed our brains to their full modern potential. The pressure of the long dry may have been the very thing that made us smarter. But the coast was not a permanent paradise. It was a crowded, contested space, the last good place in a dying world. And as the generations passed, even here, the pressure began to build. The population, though small, was growing. The shellfish beds were being picked clean. Let us see what they saw. The continent behind you is a wall of dust. The ocean before you is a vast, empty horizon. The world was closing in. The cradle that had held our species for 200,000 years was becoming a cage, and for the first time, a new, radical, and terrifying thought began to take hold. A thought born not of curiosity, not of courage, but of a simple, brutal calculation. There is no more water here. There is no more food here. There is no more future here. The only way forward was out, and so they began to look north, toward the great shimmering deserts. They did not know what lay beyond. They had no maps, no promises. They only knew that they could not stay. And so they began to look north, toward the great shimmering deserts. They did not know what lay beyond. They had no maps, no promises. They only knew that they could not stay. This was not yet the great migration that would conquer the world. This was something quieter, the beginning of a journey made of small, brave, and ultimately forgotten steps into the dust. Those first forgotten steps into the dust did not begin with a victory. They began with a whisper and a silence. Long before the great final exodus that would carry our ancestors across the entire planet, there were other journeys, pioneer voyages, brave, hopeful, and ultimately doomed experiments in leaving home. These were not failures. They were rehearsals, the forgotten migrations that tested the boundaries of the human world and found them closed. These are the stories of the first people who walked out of Africa and vanished, leaving behind only a handful of scattered bones and a quiet, haunting question. What did they find at the edge of the world? Our story takes us to a place that is now a crossroads of the world, but was then the absolute frontier, the Levant, the narrow, green corridor of land that curves around the eastern Mediterranean, connecting Africa to Asia. Today, it is a land of ancient cities and modern borders, but 120,000 years ago, it was a gateway, a lush, inviting bridge between two continents. And for a species pushed by the great drying of Africa, it must have looked like a paradise, a land of freshwater rivers, wooded hills, and herds of gazelle and deer. Let us stand with them for a moment, at the edge of this new world. You have walked for what feels like a lifetime, following the thin green ribbon of the Nile River northward through a world of sand and rock. And now, you have arrived. The air here is different. It is softer, carrying the damp, salty scent of a sea you have never seen. The plants are new. The calls of the birds are unfamiliar. This is not the land of your ancestors. And yet, it feels like a promise. There is water. There is game. There is a future here. And so, they stayed. They found shelter in the deep limestone caves that pockmark the hillsides, places like Kafsa and Skul, in what is now northern Israel. These caves became their homes, a new center for a new world. Archaeologists who have excavated these caves have found the undeniable proof of their presence. the bones of at least 10 individuals at school, and more than 15 at Kafse. These are not the bones of Neanderthals, who would later inhabit this same region. They are ours, anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Their skulls are high and rounded, their chins are prominent, their faces are flat. They are the bones of the first African pioneers. And they did not just live here. They dreamed here. Within the cave floor at Kafse, a child was buried, their hands clutching the antlers of a great red deer. At school, another person was laid to rest with the jawbone of a wild boar placed carefully on their chest. And everywhere, there is ochre. Lumps of the rich, red pigment were gathered, processed, and used in these burials. The same symbolic behavior we saw in the Cradle of Africa was carried on this first great journey. They did not leave their souls behind. They carried their rituals with them. Their need to mark the world with meaning. They were successful. For a time, the stone tools they left behind are sophisticated. They hunted the wild animals of the Levant with skill. They gathered the plants of this new, fertile land. They raised their children, buried their dead, and looked up at a sky of unfamiliar stars. They had done it. They had walked out of their ancestral home and found a new one. But they were not alone, and the world was about to change again. The warmth that had allowed them to leave Africa was a temporary gift, a brief, gentle pause between two great freezes. Around 90,000 years ago, the screw of the climate began to turn once more. The planet tilted back toward cold. The northern ice sheets began to expand again, and the paradise of the Levant began to wither. The forests shrank, the grasslands thinned. The familiar African animals they had followed were replaced by the hardier, cold-adapted creatures of Eurasia. This new world was a harder world, a leaner world, and it was a world that already had a master. This was the land of the Neanderthals, and as the climate grew colder, they were pushed south out of the freezing heart of Europe and into the last warm refuge of the Levant. And here, for the first time, our two human stories collided. We do not know the nature of this first encounter. The archaeological record is silent on the details. Was it violent? Did our two species compete for the dwindling resources of this changing land? Or was it a quiet, slow replacement, as one kind of human, better adapted to the coming cold, simply out-survived the other? Or perhaps, did they meet? Imagine what it was like to see, across a river valley, another person who was not quite a person, a different kind of human staring back at you, a strange and unsettling mirror. We do not have the answers. All we know is what happened next. The Homo sapiens vanished. The sites at Kafse and school were abandoned, and for the next 40,000 years, the Levant became Neanderthal territory. The first great exodus had ended. The pioneers were gone. What happened to them? Did they retreat back into Africa, their journey a failed experiment? Did their small, isolated population simply die out, unable to compete in this new, harder world? Or did they mingle with the Neanderthals, their genes absorbed into another human story? The truth is, we do not know. They are a ghost population, a silent chapter. Their journey was not a failure. It was a lesson. It was the first time our species had proven that it could leave its cradle, that it could adapt to new lands, new foods, new worlds. They were the scouts, the ones who walked the path first, the ones who proved that the world was larger than Africa, and their memory was not entirely lost. The story of their journey, the knowledge of the path they took, may have been passed down, a whisper of a memory of a world beyond the desert. It was a seed of an idea that would lie dormant for another 50,000 years, waiting for a different time, a different climate, and a different group of people, a people forged in the crucible of the long dry, to make the journey again. This time, not north into a land of ice and cousins, but east, following the warm coast of a forgotten path, a saltwater path. This saltwater path was not a journey of grand ambition. It was a humble choice, made by a new kind of human, a person forged in the crucible of the long dry. They were not the same people who had failed in the Levant 50,000 years before. They were the survivors. Their numbers were small, but their minds were sharper, their social bonds were stronger, and they carried a toolkit of symbols and strategies that gave them a new and powerful resilience. They were a coastal people. Their world was the thin, vibrant line where the dry land met the endless water, and their gaze was no longer turned inward, to the heart of the continent that had nearly broken them. It was turned outward, toward the horizon. The gateway for this new journey was a narrow strait of water at the southern end of the Red Sea. Today, we call it the Bab el-Mandeb, the Gate of Grief. A fitting name, perhaps, for a place that marked a final farewell to the mother continent. During the Ice Age, with sea levels much lower, this strait was not the vast 20-kilometre channel it is today. It was a series of shallow, treacherous passages, dotted with islands. A crossing was not impossible, but it was not easy. It required something new. It required a boat. We have no remains of these first, fragile vessels. They were likely simple rafts of bundled reeds, or small boats made of animal hides stretched over a frame of driftwood. They were not built for conquest. They were built to carry a single, precious cargo, a family. Let us join them, for a moment, on that fragile craft. You are huddled with your kin, the sound of the water lapping against the hide just inches from your hand. The familiar coast of Africa is a low, fading line behind you. The sun is hot on your back, the air thick with the smell of salt and unknown shores. Ahead, the dry, red cliffs of Arabia rise from the sea. This is not a journey you chose. It is a journey you were given, a single, desperate step into a world from which there will be no return. When they landed, they did not find a paradise. They found a world that was familiar enough to survive in. The southern coast of Arabia was an extension of the world they had left behind, a dry, rocky landscape, but one that was fringed with the same life-giving resources of the sea. There were mangrove swamps, rich estuaries, and rocky shores covered in shellfish. For a people who knew how to read the tides, this was a road, a path that they could follow, step by step, generation by generation, eastward into the rising sun. This was the great southern dispersal, a slow creeping wave of human expansion that hugged the coastlines of the Indian Ocean. It was a journey made at the speed of a walking family. A band might settle in a sheltered bay for a lifetime, for a dozen generations. They would live from the sea, their children growing up with the taste of salt on their tongues. And then, perhaps when the population grew too large, or the shellfish beds grew thin, a small group of younger sons and daughters would pack their tools, their embers and their stories, and walk east, for a few days, until they found the next empty bay. This was how we crossed the world, not in a single, heroic march, but in 1,000 small, unremembered departures. The life they lived was a new rhythm. Theirs was a world governed by the moon. At low tide, the women and children would walk out onto the exposed tidal flats, their woven baskets on their backs. They would gather mussels, oysters, and clams, the reliable, daily bread of the sea. The men would hunt the small gazelle that came to the coast to lick the salt, or use their spears to fish in the shallow lagoons. Their toolkit was small, efficient, and portable. They carried with them the tiny, beautifully crafted stone points known as microliths. These were not the heavy hand axes of their distant ancestors. These were the components of a sophisticated, modular technology. Small, sharp flakes of stone that could be set into a wooden handle to make a knife, or hafted onto a light shaft to make a spear or an arrow. Their tools were as light and as adaptable as they were, and they carried their minds with them. They carried the memory of symbols. At sites along this coastal route, we find the same pierced seashells, the same lumps of processed red ochre that we saw in Africa. This was not just an expansion of people. It was an expansion of an idea. The idea that the world could be marked with meaning. The idea that a human life was something worth decorating. For thousands of years, they walked, following the coastline of what is now Yemen, Oman, and Iran. They were not explorers in our sense of the word. They were simply people, living their lives at the edge of the sea. They likely had no idea that they were part of a great, world-changing migration. They only knew the rhythm of their own small world, the taste of the shellfish, the feel of the monsoon winds, the stories they told around the fire at night. But this slow, coastal journey was not the whole story. The path they followed was not just a barren strip of sand. The world they were walking into was holding a secret, a memory of a time, not long before, when the great monsoons had been stronger, a time when the desert itself had been alive. And just inland from their saltwater path lay the faint, ghostly traces of a forgotten world, a world of rivers and of grass, the world of a green Arabia. That world of rivers and grass was not a myth. It was a landscape waiting to be rediscovered. For the people of the saltwater path, living their lives by the rhythm of the tides, the vast, dry interior of the Arabian Peninsula would have seemed like a forbidden land, a place of rock and heat and silence. But the human mind is a map of memory, and memory is a curious thing. Perhaps it was a story passed down from an elder of a time when the rains were different. Perhaps it was a hunter following the tracks of a gazelle further inland than anyone had gone before. Or perhaps, after a rare season of strong monsoons, a flicker of green appeared on the distant, shimmering horizon, a promise of something more, a world beyond the shore. Whatever the reason, some of them turned inland, and what they found was not a desert. It was a ghost, the ghost of a green and fertile world. Let us walk with them, away from the salt and the sea, into the heart of this lost Arabia. At first, the journey is hard. You move through a landscape of wind-scoured rock and shifting sand dunes. The sun is a relentless weight on your shoulders. Water is a memory, carried in a skin bag. But then you see it. A line of impossible green, cutting through the red rock of a dry canyon. It is a wadi, a riverbed that is dry for most of the year. But deep beneath the sand, the memory of water still flows. You follow this ancient path. And as you walk, the world begins to change. You see the fossilized roots of trees clinging to the canyon walls. You find the sun-bleached shells of freshwater snails thousands of kilometers from the ocean. These are the clues. The whispers of a different time. A time, not so long ago, when this entire desert was a savanna. This was the world of the African humid period, a recurring climatic phase driven by the same orbital cycles that caused the great ice ages. When the Earth's wobble brought the northern summer sun to its peak, the African and Asian monsoons surged with power. And for thousands of years at a time, the Sahara and the Arabian deserts were transformed. Great, seasonal rivers flowed where now there is only sand. Vast, shallow lakes shimmered in the basins between the dunes, and the land was covered in a rich carpet of grassland, dotted with acacia and tamarisk trees. This was a world our ancestors would have recognized. It was a piece of Africa, adrift in a sea of sand, and it was filled with African life. Herds of gazelle, oryx, and wild cattle moved across these ancient grasslands, ostriches and giraffes, even, perhaps, hippos and crocodiles, living in the great, lost rivers of central Arabia. The first people who turned inland from the coast were stepping into this echo. The great rains had mostly retreated by their time, around 65,000 years ago. The world was in a dry phase again, but the ghost of that green world remained. The river systems, though mostly dry, still held pockets of water. The deep canyons provided shade and shelter, and the high plateaus of the interior still caught enough rain to support a network of oases and grasslands. This was not a single, easy path. It was a network of fragile, interconnected corridors, a secret map of survival, known only to those who knew how to read the subtle signs of the land. Imagine what it was like to find one of these places. After days of walking through a landscape of rock and sun, you come to the edge of a great escarpment. And below you, nestled in a deep basin, is a sight you thought you had lost forever. A lake. Its surface is a sheet of impossible blue, fringed with the green of reeds and palm trees. You can hear the calls of waterbirds. You can smell the damp, rich scent of life. You have walked out of the desert and into a memory. Archaeologists have found the tools of our ancestors scattered all around the shores of these now vanished lakes. Stone points, scrapers, and blades, left behind by small bands of people who camped here, perhaps for a season, perhaps for a generation. They were hunting the gazelle that came to drink. They were gathering the roots and seeds that grew in the damp soil. They were living in a temporary paradise, a pocket of the old world that had not yet surrendered to the great dry. This network of inland corridors was not just a place to live. It was a highway. It allowed the people of the longest walk to move through the heart of Arabia, not just around its edges. It was a faster, more direct route to the east, a shortcut through a forgotten garden. But this world was fragile, and it was temporary. The monsoons were weakening. The great drying was not over. The lakes were shrinking, the rivers were fading, the green corridors were closing in. The people who lived in this green Arabia were living on borrowed time, and they must have known it. This is what it would have felt like. You return to the lake that sustained your family for a lifetime, but this year the shoreline has retreated. The reeds are thinner, the waterbirds are fewer. The elders look to the sky, and their faces are grim. They know the stories. They remember the long dry that pushed their ancestors out of their first home, and they know that it is happening again. The ghost of the green world was fading, and once again the people were faced with a choice: to retreat back to the coast, to the reliable but crowded world of the sea, or to keep walking, to push eastward, following the last of the rivers, chasing the last of the herds, hoping to find another refuge before this one vanished completely. It was not a choice made in a single moment. It was a slow, painful, and necessary continuation of the journey. A journey that was not just a walk across space, but a race against time. The Green Arabia is one of the great lost worlds of our human story, a testament to the incredible power of climate to make and unmake entire landscapes, and a testament to the incredible resilience of our ancestors, who learned to find a path through a world that was constantly vanishing beneath their feet. They did not leave behind cities or monuments. They left only a few scattered stones by the shores of a lake that is now a desert. But in those stones, we can read the story of their journey. A journey of discovery, a journey of loss, and a journey that proved that even in the driest of lands, the human spirit could find a way to follow the water. And as the last of the green corridors faded into the dust of what is now the empty quarter, our ancestors stood at a new threshold, the mountains of Oman. And beyond them, the great, shimmering expanse of the Indian Ocean. The walk was not over. In many ways, it had just begun. But they were no longer just Africans. They were becoming something else. The people of a new world, a world of forests and ghosts. That new world of forests and ghosts began at the edge of the sea. After the slow crossing of the Arabian Peninsula, a journey made possible by the fading memory of a greener time, our ancestors arrived at the shores of the Indian Ocean, and they kept walking. Their path was not a march inland. It was a patient, generational journey that once again hugged the coastline. A great eastward arc that would carry them along the shores of what is now Iran, Pakistan, and India. This was a different world from the one they had left behind. The dry savannas of Africa and the fragile grasslands of Arabia gave way to a landscape that was richer, wetter, and far more complex. Great river deltas emptied into the sea, creating vast, fertile mangrove forests. The monsoon winds, though weaker than in ages past, still brought enough rain to support dense, tropical woodlands that teemed with a new and bewildering variety of life. Let us join them as they step into this world for the first time. The air is no longer dry and dusty. It is thick and wet and heavy with the smell of salt and rot and 1,000 different kinds of flowers. The light is different here. It does not come from a wide, open sky, but filters down in shifting green-gold shafts through a dense canopy of leaves. The sounds are a chorus of clicks and calls and hisses, a language you do not understand. The very ground beneath your feet feels different. Not the hard, cracked earth of the drylands, but a soft, damp carpet of fallen leaves. This was a world of abundance, but it was also a world of shadows. In the open savanna, you can see danger coming from a kilometre away. But here, in the forest, the world shrinks to the space of a few metres. Every shadow could hide a predator. A great tiger, striped like the shifting light. A silent, waiting crocodile in the murky water of the river. Even the plants themselves were a new kind of challenge. Some were a source of food, others a source of poison. To survive here required a new kind of knowledge, a new kind of attention. But our ancestors were masters of adaptation. The same skills that had allowed them to survive the long dry now allowed them to thrive in this new green world. Their toolkit of small, efficient microliths was perfect for this environment, light to carry, easy to make, and adaptable to 1,000 different tasks. A small, sharp flake could be used to scale a fish, to whittle a wooden trap, or to slice open a strange, new kind of fruit. They lived, as they had for millennia, from the sea. The coast was still their larder. Great shell midden spiles of discarded shells, accumulated over generations, are found all along this ancient coastal route. They are the quiet, humble monuments of the longest walk. Each shell, a single meal. Each midden, a testament to 1,000 years of patient survival. But this new world held a different kind of shadow, a deeper mystery. It was not just the animals that were new. The forest was not empty. There were other people here, people who were not them. Imagine what it was like. You are walking along a narrow, game trail, the air thick and still, and then you see it. A footprint, pressed into the damp earth. It is the print of a bare foot, but it is wider than yours, shorter, with a different kind of arch. And a little further on, you find the remains of a hearth. The ashes are cold, weeks old perhaps, but beside them lies a stone tool. It is a heavy, crude chopper, a technology your own people have not used for 100,000 years. This is not the work of your kin. This is the work of a different kind of human, a ghost in the forest. These were the ghost populations of Asia, the descendants of the much earlier migrations of Homo erectus and other unknown hominins who had left Africa hundreds of thousands of years before us. They had been living in this world for eons. They were the original people of this land. And we were the newcomers. What happened when these two worlds met? When a band of slender, dark-skinned modern humans, carrying their sophisticated tools and their symbolic minds, came face to face with a stockier, more archaic kind of person. The archaeological record is almost entirely silent. There are no great battlefields, no signs of a widespread violent conquest. But there is another kind of record, a record that is written in our blood. The DNA of modern human populations in Asia, especially in the islands of Southeast Asia and the highlands of New Guinea, carries the faint, unmistakable echo of these encounters. Our ancestors did not just replace these archaic peoples. They met them, and they mingled with them. The ghosts of the forest live on as a small but significant part of our own genetic story. This was not a single event. It was a long, slow process of interaction that played out over thousands of years in thousands of different valleys, forests, and caves. Sometimes the encounter might have been fleeting, a glimpse of a strange figure across a river, a story told around the fire of a different kind of people who lived in the deep forest. Sometimes it might have been hostile, a competition for the same resources, the same hunting grounds, the same sacred places, and sometimes it must have been intimate, This is what it might have felt like. You are a young woman, and your band has settled near a great waterfall. One day, a man from a different band appears at the edge of the camp. He is a stranger. He looks different. He speaks a language you cannot understand. But he brings a gift. A rare, beautiful seashell. And in his eyes, you see not a threat, but a shared humanity, a shared loneliness, a shared need for connection. This is how the story of us was written. Not in great, sweeping conquests, but in small, personal, and unrecorded moments of choice. A choice to fear, or a choice to trust. A choice to fight, or a choice to share. Enough of our ancestors, it seems, chose to share. And in doing so, they inherited more than just new territory. They inherited a new kind of resilience. The archaic peoples of Asia had been living in this world for 500,000 years. Their bodies and their immune systems were adapted to the local pathogens, the local foods, the local climate. By mingling with them, our ancestors may have acquired a vital genetic toolkit for surviving in this new world. A ghost's gift of survival. But the story of the ghosts is also a story of loss. Because, in the end, they vanished. Over the course of 10,000 years, as modern humans spread through Asia, the archaic peoples disappeared from the fossil record. Was it a slow demographic replacement, as the newcomers, with their more sophisticated technology and perhaps higher birth rates, simply outnumbered them? Was it the new diseases that our ancestors brought with them from Africa? Or was it simply a process of absorption, their smaller populations slowly, gently, blending into the larger human story until they were no longer a separate people, but a memory, a whisper in our DNA? We do not know. The ghosts took their secrets with them, but their presence reminds us of a fundamental truth of the longest walk. Our ancestors did not walk into an empty world. They walked into a world that was already ancient, a world that was already full of other human stories. And the story of our own success is not just the story of our own strength. It is also the story of the people we met, the people we learned from, and the people we absorbed along the way. The ghosts of the forest are not a separate story. They are the first, lost chapter of our own, and as our ancestors continued their walk eastward toward the great rising sun, they carried those ghosts with them. They were a new kind of human now, a hybrid. A creature of many pasts, walking toward a single, unknown future. And the strangest part of their journey was still to come. A journey that would take them not just through a forest, but across the sea. That journey across the sea was not a choice. It was a consequence. After thousands of years of walking, our ancestors had reached the edge of a continent. The great eastward arc of the Asian coastline had carried them as far as they could go. Before them lay a new kind of world. Not a forest, not a desert, not a savanna, but a vast, shimmering, and seemingly endless expanse of blue. This was the Sunder Shelf. At the peak of the Ice Age, when sea levels were at their lowest, this was a single, continuous landmass. A tropical subcontinent that connected what are now the islands of Borneo, Java, and Sumatra to the mainland of Asia. But to the east lay something else, a world apart, a line in the water that had never been crossed. This is the Wallacea Line, a deep, powerful, and permanent ocean trench that has separated the ecosystems of Asia from the strange, isolated world of Australia for millions of years. Even at the lowest sea levels, this was not a land bridge. It was a series of vast, open water crossings, dozens of kilometers of unpredictable currents, winds, and waves. To the animals of the world, it was an impassable barrier, and it should have been for us, too. But it was not. Sometime around 65,000 years ago, a small band of Homo sapiens stood on the easternmost shores of Sunda, looked out across that impossible blue, and decided to cross. Let us try to stand with them on that final beach. You can feel the warm, damp sand under your feet, The air is thick with the smell of salt, and the sound of the waves is a constant, rhythmic roar. The world you know is behind you. A world of forests, of rivers, of ghosts. But in front of you is nothing, just a horizon. And on that horizon, on the clearest of days, you can see it. A faint, hazy, blue shadow. A smudge of a cloud that is not a cloud. Another land. How do you get there? You cannot walk. You cannot swim. You must do something that no human, in the entire 3 million-year history of our lineage, has ever done before. You must build a boat, and you must sail into the unknown. This was not a casual act. This was a technological and cognitive leap as profound as the taming of fire or the first flaking of stone. The vessels themselves were likely simple. We have no remains, only the logic of what was possible. Perhaps they were great rafts, made from the giant bamboo that grew in the tropical forests, lashed together with ropes of braided vine, buoyant, stable, and capable of carrying a small community. Or perhaps they were dugout canoes, hollowed from the trunks of massive trees using a slow, patient combination of fire and stone adzes. Either way, they had to be more than just logs. They had to be seaworthy. They had to be a home on the water. And you had to have a plan. This was not a journey you could make in an afternoon. The crossing of Wallacea was not a single voyage. It was a series of island hops, a multi-generational game of celestial and ecological chess. You would have had to carry everything you needed: your stone tools, your wooden spears, baskets of food, dried fish, roasted tubers, and containers of fresh water, a priceless cargo carried in skin bags or sealed bamboo tubes. And you would have had to carry a fire, a precious, living ember, carefully shielded from the wind and the spray in a clay-lined basket or a large seashell. To lose the fire on the open ocean would be to lose everything. This was not a journey for a lone hunter. This was a journey for a community, men, women, and children, the knowledge of the elders and the strength of the young. It had to be a deliberate, planned colonization. A group of people who were not just exploring, they were moving, they were leaving, and they were not planning on coming back. Imagine what that final moment felt like. The raft is loaded, your kin are gathered. You push off from the shore, the cries of the seabirds a familiar farewell. The land you have always known, the only world you have ever seen, begins to shrink behind you. The familiar trees, the smoke from the hearths, it all becomes a thin green line, and then it is gone. You are adrift, a small, fragile island of humanity in a world of water and sky. The sun is your only clock, the stars your only map, and your only certainty is the courage of the person beside you. Days would have passed, nights filled with the strange, phosphorescent glow of the deep ocean. They would have faced storms, rogue waves, the terror of the open water, and they would have been guided by a form of knowledge we have almost entirely lost, a deep, intuitive understanding of the natural world. They would have read the patterns of the waves, the direction of the swell. They would have followed the flight of migrating birds, knowing they were heading toward land. They would have watched the clouds that gather over islands. This was not magic. This was the science of a people who lived entirely within the world, not on top of it. And then, after days, or perhaps weeks, at sea, they would have seen it. The blue smudge on the horizon, growing larger, becoming green. The smell of land, of damp earth and flowers, carried on the wind. The sound of waves breaking, not on the side of their raft, but on a shore. They had made it. They had crossed the impossible. They had walked on water. But the world they arrived in was not just a new land. It was a different planet. This was Sahul, the great, isolated supercontinent of Australia and New Guinea, a world that had been separated from the rest of the planet for 40 million years, a place where evolution had run a different experiment. The trees were strange, the great, ghostly eucalyptus, their bark peeling in the sun. The flowers were new, And the animals were creatures from a dream. This was not a world of tigers and monkeys. This was a world of marsupials, creatures that carried their young in pouches. Great grey kangaroos, standing taller than a man, moving with an impossible, bounding grace. Wombats the size of small bears, digging great burrows in the earth. And the giants, the megafauna of this lost world. Diprotodon, a rhinoceros-sized marsupial, the largest that ever lived. Procoptodon, a giant, short-faced kangaroo with a single, massive toe on each foot. And Megalania, a 5-meter-long venomous goanna, a true dragon, the apex predator of this strange new Eden. The first people to step ashore in Sahul were stepping into a world that had never known a primate like them. They were the first true aliens, and they were the most dangerous predator this continent had ever seen. They were not faster than the kangaroo, or stronger than the Diprotodon, but they had a mind that could see the future. They had the fire, and they had the spear. The great, beautiful, and terrifying story of Australia was about to begin. But the story of the voyage itself stands as one of the single greatest achievements in the history of our species. It was an act of courage, of ingenuity, and of a kind of faith that is almost beyond our ability to comprehend. A faith not in gods, but in a distant shoreline. A faith in the strength of their own small community. And a faith that the world was a place that could be crossed. This was the moment we truly became a global species. The moment we proved that no ocean, no desert, no mountain range could permanently hold us back. The moment we untethered ourselves from the land and became the people of the horizon. And it was a journey made not with steel, or with sails, or with compasses. It was made with bamboo, and vine, and fire, and with a quiet, stubborn belief that the world was not a cage, it was a path. That path led them into a world of impossible creatures, a world that had been dreaming on its own for 40 million years. When the first people stepped from their rafts onto the shores of Sahul, they were not just entering a new land. They were stepping into a different version of time. An alternate evolutionary story. A continent of life that had followed its own strange and beautiful logic. This was Australia, and it was a land of giants. The air itself would have felt different, thicker, and filled with the aromatic, oily scent of eucalyptus. The sunlight seemed harsher, brighter, unfiltered by the familiar haze of the Asian tropics. The forests were not the dense, green tangle they had left behind. They were open and grey and strangely silent. A world of ghostly white gum trees, their bark peeling in long, papery strips. And in this silence, the ground itself seemed to be alive. Let us try to see this world through their eyes. You take your first cautious steps away from the beach, your spear held ready. The world feels watchful, and then you see it. At first, it is just a shape, half hidden in the shade of a giant fern. A creature the size of a rhinoceros, but with the familiar, whiskered face of a wombat, its body covered in coarse grey fur. It is a Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that has ever lived. It looks at you with a slow, placid curiosity, its great jaws chewing on a mouthful of leaves. It has never seen a human before. It has no name for you. It does not know that you are the most dangerous thing that has ever walked this land. This was the strange, unnerving innocence of the Australian megafauna. They had evolved for millennia in a world without a clever, two-legged predator. Their only enemies were other giants, the marsupial lion with its terrifying bolt-cutter teeth, or the great, venomous lizard, Megalania. They did not know the meaning of a thrown spear. They did not understand the logic of a coordinated hunt. And in this lack of fear lay their doom. For the first humans, this was a world of bewildering abundance, a paradise of protein, walking slowly and openly across the landscape. The challenges here were not the cunning of the prey, but the strangeness of the world itself. The rules of survival had to be rewritten from scratch. Imagine the first time you see a kangaroo. Not the small, shy wallabies of the forest edge, but a Procoptodon, a giant, short-faced kangaroo, standing 3 meters tall. It does not hop. It walks, on 2 enormous, single-toed feet, like a creature from a myth. Its face is flat, its eyes forward-looking, intelligent. It moves through the open woodland, not with fear, but with an ancient, ponderous authority. The first hunters to face such a creature would have had to learn a new kind of respect. This was a land that did not obey the old stories. The plants were new. Many of the familiar, edible roots and fruits of Asia were gone, replaced by a flora that was often toxic, or protected by thorns and tough, woody skins. To eat here was to learn a new encyclopedia of the earth, a process of trial and error, and sometimes death. The survivors were the ones who watched, who learned to see which plants the kangaroos ate, who learned to dig for the starchy yams that grew deep beneath the hard, dry soil, who learned to leach the poison from the cycad nuts, a secret that unlocked a mountain of food. And they learned a new way to hunt. The open woodlands and grasslands of Sahul were a perfect environment for a new and deadly technology: fire. Our ancestors had carried the knowledge of fire with them for 100,000 years. But here, in this dry, flammable landscape, fire became more than just a tool for warmth and cooking. It became a weapon. And a paintbrush. This is what it would have felt like. You stand with your band at the edge of a wide, dry plain. The wind is blowing in the right direction. With a burning branch, you touch the edge of the dry grass, and the world explodes. A wall of flame roars across the landscape, a great, crackling, orange wave. The kangaroos, the giant wombats, the flightless birds, they are driven before it in a panic, driven toward the waiting spears of your fellow hunters. This is fire stick farming. Not farming of plants, but farming of animals. A way of using the fire to shape the landscape itself, to create a world that is more open, more predictable, and more productive for the hunter. Over thousands of years, this deliberate, patterned burning transformed the continent. The dense, fire-sensitive forests retreated. The fire-loving eucalyptus and grasslands expanded. Our ancestors did not just live in Australia. They created it. They painted the modern landscape with a brush of fire. But this new power came at a terrible cost. The arrival of humans in Sahul, around 65,000 years ago, coincides with one of the most devastating extinction events in the planet's history. Within a few thousand years, more than 90% of Australia's large animal species were gone. The Diprotodon, the giant kangaroos, the marsupial lion, the great flightless birds, all vanished. Was it the fire? Was it the relentless pressure of the hunt on a fauna that had no defense against this new kind of predator? Or was it, again, the climate, the increasing dryness of the continent, a force that was already pushing these creatures to the brink? The debate is fierce, and it is still unresolved. But the pattern is a haunting one. A new, clever predator arrives, and the world of the giants ends. The story of our arrival in this land is not a simple story of heroic discovery. It is also a story of a great and tragic loss. A loss of a world so strange and so magnificent that we can now only glimpse it in the fossil record. A world that we unmade almost as soon as we found it, and the people were changed by this loss. As the giants disappeared, they were forced to adapt again. They learned to hunt the smaller, faster kangaroos and wallabies that survived. They learned to rely more on the plants, the fish, the small treasures of the earth. And they began to create a new kind of story, a new kind of memory. This is the birth of the dreaming. The complex, profound, and ancient cosmology of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, a worldview in which the spirits of the great ancestors, the giant beings who had shaped the world in a lost, sacred time, still live within the land. The rocks, the rivers, the waterholes, these are not just features of a landscape. They are the sleeping bodies of the creation spirits. They are the memory of the giants. Is it possible that the dreaming is not just a myth? Is it possible that it is a form of history, a deep, poetic, and symbolic memory of a real, lived experience? A memory of a time when the world truly was inhabited by giants, a way of holding onto a world that was lost by weaving it into the very fabric of the land itself, a way of saying, they are not gone, they are just sleeping. The first people of Sahul were not just colonists, they were survivors. They had crossed an impossible ocean. They had learned to live in a world of alien plants and animals. They had harnessed the power of fire to reshape a continent. And they had witnessed the end of an entire geological era. They had watched a world of giants die. And in the great, silent, and sun-baked heart of this new land, they created a new kind of human mind. A mind that was woven into the landscape itself. A mind that carried a 40,000-year-old memory, not in books, but in songs. In stories, in footsteps, a different kind of longest walk. A journey not across the world, but into it. A journey that is still being walked today. And as our own ancestors continued their journey eastward, into the colder, harder lands of the north, they would soon face their own world of giants. And their own ghosts. The ghosts of other humans. Those other humans were not a memory or a myth. They were a living, breathing reality. While one branch of our ancestral family was learning the secrets of the Australian continent, another was pushing northward into the cold, high-altitude heart of Asia. And the world they walked into was not empty. It was already home to a different kind of people. A people whose story was as old and as deep as our own. A people we now call the Denisovans. We know them not from their cities, or their art, or their tools. We know them from a ghost, a genetic whisper found in a single, perfectly preserved finger bone of a young girl who lived and died in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia over 50,000 years ago. This is Denisova Cave. Not a grand cathedral, but a simple, dusty shelter in the rock. And yet, it is one of the most important places in the human story, because this is where we met the other. The journey into this world was a slow, arduous climb. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, were still a tropical people. Their slender bodies were not built for the thin, cold air of the high plateaus. But they were, by now, masters of adaptation. They carried with them the memory of fire, the art of the sewing needle, and the sophisticated, social strategies of the hunt. As they moved north, out of the warm forests of Southeast Asia, they followed the great river valleys into the interior of what is now China, and then westward toward the mountains. Let us try to feel what this journey was like. You are climbing. The air is getting thinner, colder. Every breath is an effort. The familiar, lush green of the lowlands has given way to a world of rock and wind and hardy, low-lying shrubs. The animals here are different. Great, shaggy yaks with horns that curve like the crescent moon. Wild sheep that move across the impossible cliffs with a dancer's grace. This is a vertical world, a world of immense, silent spaces. And it feels ancient. One day you find a shelter, a wide, open-mouthed cave protected from the wind. There is a hearth in the centre, the ashes still faintly warm, and there are tools scattered on the floor. But they are not your tools. They are larger, heavier, made with a different logic. And the bones in the hearth are not just from animals. This is not a camp. This is a home. And you are not the first person to live in it. This was the world of the Denisovans. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had been the people of High Asia. They were a sister species to the Neanderthals, their ancestors having split from that lineage nearly 500,000 years before. They were adapted to this world of cold and altitude in a way that our own ancestors were not. Their bodies were likely robust, their faces broad. But their true secret was in their blood. The DNA from that single finger bone tells us that the Denisovans carried a special gene, a variant of E-Passani, which allowed their bodies to thrive in the low-oxygen environment of the high mountains. It was their superpower, their genetic key to this difficult, beautiful world. What happened when our two peoples met? The story is not one of conquest. It is a story of connection, and it is a story we can read today in the DNA of living people. The ancestors of modern Tibetans, of the Sherpa of the Himalayas, of the peoples of Melanesia and Papua New Guinea, they all carry the genetic legacy of the Denisovans. Our two peoples did not just meet, they had children together, and those children inherited the ghost. Imagine what that first encounter was like. You are a hunter, and you are tracking a wild sheep. You see a figure on the ridge above you. It is a person, but not your person. They are broader than you, perhaps their skin a different shade. They are watching you. There is a moment of silence, a moment of fear, a moment of curiosity. In that single, unrecorded moment, the future of humanity is being decided. Do you raise your spear, or do you raise your hand? Enough of them, it seems, chose to raise their hand. Because the Denisovan gene for high-altitude adaptation did not enter our lineage by accident. It was a gift, a legacy passed on through an act of trust, of intimacy, of love. Our ancestors, the newcomers, were struggling to survive in this thin air. The Denisovans, the original people, had the answer written in their very cells, and by mingling with them, we inherited their strength. We became a little bit Denisovan, a little bit more adapted to this new, high-altitude world. This is one of the most profound and beautiful discoveries of modern genetics. It has rewritten our understanding of ourselves. We are not a pure species that replaced all others in a clean, linear sweep. We are a hybrid, a mosaic, a river that has been fed by many ancient streams. We carry the legacy of these ghost populations within us. The Denisovans are not truly extinct. A part of them is still alive, today, in the heartbeats of millions of people. A part of them is still breathing the thin, cold air of the high mountains. But the story in Denisova Cave is even more complex, because in that same dusty floor, archaeologists found another fragment of bone. The bone of a young girl who died 90,000 years ago. And when they sequenced her DNA, they found something astonishing. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was a first-generation child of two different kinds of human. A living, breathing proof that the boundaries between our ancient species were not walls. They were veils. This tells us that the world of the Ice Age was a world of movement and of mingling. It was not a static collection of isolated peoples. It was a great, braided river of genes and ideas. A world where a Neanderthal woman from the West could travel or be brought to a cave in Siberia and have a child with a Denisovan man from the East. And it is into this complex, interconnected world that our own ancestors walked. We were not the first globalized people. We were just the last ones standing. And our success was not just our own. It was built upon the legacy of the people we met along the way. The people whose knowledge, whose genes, and whose stories we absorbed into our own. The ghosts of the forest, and the other humans of the high mountains. So, when we look at the great silent peaks of the Himalayas, we should not just see mountains. We should see a monument to a lost kind of human who learned how to breathe at the top of the world, and who, in a single act of connection, passed that secret on to us. The Denisovans are a quiet, humbling reminder that we are not the heroes of this story. We are the inheritors. And the longest walk was not a monologue. It was a conversation that is still echoing, faintly, in our blood. A conversation between us and the other humans in the mirror. And as our ancestors turned their faces westward, toward the final, frozen frontier of Europe, they were about to meet the most famous of all our lost cousins, the people of the cold, the Neanderthals. Those cousins in the cold had been masters of their world for 200,000 years. Long before our own species had even left Africa, the Neanderthals were the undisputed people of Ice Age Europe. They were not brutish cavemen. They were a successful and profoundly adapted kind of human, the true children of the ice. Their bodies were a testament to their world. Short, stocky, and immensely powerful, they were built to conserve heat in a land of relentless winter. Their wide nasal passages warmed the frigid air before it reached their lungs. Their large brains, in some cases even larger than our own, were housed in a long, low skull, a different architecture for a different kind of mind. They were the original survivors. They had endured the slow, grinding cycles of the glaciers. They hunted the great beasts of the European steppe, the woolly rhino, the giant deer, the wild horse. They made sophisticated stone tools, the refined flakes of the Mousterian tradition. They cared for their sick and their elderly, and they buried their dead. This was their home, and for millennia they had no rivals. And then we arrived. Around 45,000 years ago, the first bands of Homo sapiens began to push into Europe from the east. They were the descendants of the same great wave that had carried our ancestors across Asia. But they were a different people now. Generations of walking, of adapting, of mingling with the ghosts in the forest had changed them. They carried a new kind of toolkit, the sharp, elegant blades of the Upper Paleolithic. They carried the memory of the sewing needle and the art of tailored clothing. And they carried a mind that was exploding with a new kind of symbolic fire. The world they entered was not a paradise. It was the frozen, wind-blasted heart of Ice Age Europe, a landscape of tundra and steppe and great, silent forests of pine. And it was a world that was already full. Let us try to imagine that first, fateful encounter. You are a Neanderthal hunter, and you are following the tracks of a reindeer through a snowy valley. You have known this valley your entire life. Every rock, every tree, every bend in the frozen river, and then you see it. Smoke rising from a grove of trees where no smoke should be, and you hear a sound you have never heard before. Not the call of a wolf or the cry of a bird, but the sound of a different kind of voice. Higher pitched, more musical, a language that is not your language. You move closer, your heavy spear held tight in your powerful hand, and through the trees you see them. They are tall and slender and dark-skinned. They move with a strange, lanky grace. Their faces are flat, their foreheads high, their chins pointed. They are like you, and not like you at all. They are a new kind of human, and they are in your home. What happened next is the great, unresolved drama of the human story. For 10,000 years, our two species lived side by side in the cold landscapes of Ice Age Europe. 10,000 years. That is twice the length of all of recorded human history. This was not a brief, violent encounter. It was a long, slow, and incredibly complex relationship. For decades, we told a simple story. A story of conquest. The story that we, the clever, creative Homo sapiens, with our superior tools and our superior minds, simply outcompeted our dull, brutish cousins. That we drove them to extinction in a swift, merciless wave of replacement. But the evidence, as it so often does, tells a different, more complicated, and more interesting story. There was no single, swift replacement. In many regions, our two peoples seem to have lived in a state of dynamic, shifting coexistence. Sometimes we occupied the same caves, but at different times. A layer of Neanderthal tools will be found, then a sterile layer of sand, then a layer of sapiens tools, then another Neanderthal layer. They were moving in and out of the same territories, perhaps following different herds, or using the landscape in different seasons. They were not living together, but they were aware of each other. They were neighbours, and there is evidence of exchange, not just of territory, but of ideas. In the final millennia of the Neanderthals, we see something new appear in their toolkit, a culture we call the Châtel-Perronian. It includes the fine blade-like tools that were the signature of our own species, but also, for the first time, personal ornaments. Pierced animal teeth and carved ivory pendants, found alongside Neanderthal bones. Did they invent this symbolic behavior on their own, a parallel evolution of the mind? Or did they learn it from us? Did they see the strange, new people with their necklaces of teeth and their painted bodies and decide to adopt their magic? It is a tantalizing possibility, a sign that our first great cultural exchange may have been with another kind of human. And the exchange went both ways. The story is in our DNA. Every non-African human alive today carries between 1 and 3% Neanderthal DNA. The ghost of our lost cousins is inside us. This is the undeniable proof that our two species did not just compete. They did not just learn from each other. They saw each other as partners, as mates, as human. Imagine what it was like. You are a young Sapiens woman, and your band is struggling through a hard winter. You meet a man from a different band. He is a Neanderthal. He is broader than the men of your own people. His brow is heavier. His voice is a low rumble. But he is a master of this cold world. He knows where to find the hidden dens of the hibernating bears. He knows how to read the subtle signs of a coming blizzard. He is a survivor, and in his eyes you see not an animal, not a monster, but a person who can help your family survive, a person who could be the father of your children. This is how our two stories became one, in small, unrecorded moments of trust and connection, in children born of two different worlds, children who carried the resilience of the Neanderthals and the restless, symbolic mind of the Sapiens. And this genetic inheritance was not a neutral thing. The Neanderthal genes we carry are not a random sample. Many of them are related to our immune system, giving us the tools to fight off the new pathogens of Europe. Others are related to our skin and hair, perhaps helping us adapt to the lower light and the colder temperatures of the north. The Neanderthals did not just give us a part of their story. They gave us a part of their strength, a 40,000-year-old gift of survival. But this story does not have a happy ending, because, in the end, we survived, and they did not. Around 40,000 years ago, after 200 millennia of success, the Neanderthals vanished from the fossil record. Their fires went out. Their tools were buried. Their voices fell silent. Why? There is no single, easy answer. It was likely a combination of pressures. The climate was becoming increasingly unstable, with rapid, violent swings of temperature that would have been hard on their specialized hunting strategies. Our own species, with its more flexible toolkit and its larger, more complex social networks, may have been better able to cope with this chaos. And perhaps we simply outnumbered them. The Sapiens population, fueled by the Great Migration from the east, was growing. The Neanderthals, who had always lived in small, isolated bands, may have simply been absorbed, their genetic stream slowly diluted in the great, rising river of our own. Their end was not a dramatic, final battle. It was a long, slow, and perhaps very quiet fading, a demographic whisper, and so we were left alone. The last humans. But we are not the same people who had walked into Europe 10,000 years before. We are the people who carry the memory of the cousins in the cold. We carry their strength in our immune systems. We carry their ghosts in our DNA. And we carry their story as a quiet, humbling reminder. A reminder that our own survival was not a solitary achievement. It was a conversation with a different kind of human who taught us how to live in the cold, and who, in the end, became a part of us. Their world is gone, but their echo remains. And as our own ancestors stood, alone, in the frozen heart of Ice Age Europe, they were about to unleash a new kind of magic, a great, explosive flowering of the human mind that would cover the walls of the deep, dark caves with meaning. That explosion of meaning did not come from nothing. It was a fire that had been smouldering for 100,000 years in the quiet hearths of Africa and on the lonely coasts of the southern path. But here, in the cold, dark, and challenging world of Ice Age Europe, in the wake of the encounter with our Neanderthal cousins, that fire roared to life. Something changed in us. Or perhaps something that had always been there was finally unlocked. It was as if the human mind, having crossed the entire world, had finally found a canvas vast enough and dark enough to paint its dreams upon. This was the dawn of the Upper Paleolithic, and it was a revolution not of stone, but of the soul. For the first time in the archaeological record, we see a sustained, widespread, and dazzling explosion of symbolic behavior. It was not just a few scratched lines on a piece of ochre or a handful of pierced shells. It was a universe of art, of music, of ritual, of personal adornment. It was the birth of culture in a form that we can finally, intuitively, recognize as our own. The most dramatic evidence of this change is found in the deep, silent darkness of the caves. Places that were never meant for living were transformed into the world's first temples, sanctuaries of memory and of magic. Let us go inside one of them. Let us enter the world of Chauvet Cave, in what is now southern France. The entrance was sealed by a rockfall over 20,000 years ago, creating a perfect time capsule of the Ice Age mind. To step inside is to step into a dream. You follow a narrow, winding passage, your small stone lamp casting a flickering, uncertain light. The air is cold and still, and smells of damp earth and a deep, ancient silence. And then the passage opens into a vast chamber, and you raise your lamp, and the walls are alive. Not with the familiar, gentle animals of the hunt, the deer, the horse, the bison, but with the great, terrifying predators of the Ice Age. A pride of 16 cave lions, their bodies overlapping, their heads turned as one, their eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond your light. A herd of woolly rhinoceroses, their great horns lowered in a silent, eternal charge. Great, shaggy mammoths, their tusks curving to the cave floor. And the bears, the great lumbering cave bears, their outlines traced in black, their spirits seeming to emerge from the very rock itself. This is not a record of a hunt. This is a vision, a journey into the spirit world. The artists who made this, and we must call them artists, were masters. They used the natural curves and bulges of the cave wall to give their creatures a sense of three-dimensional life. They used shading, perspective, and a confident, flowing line that would not be seen again until the Renaissance. This was not primitive. This was a work of genius, and it was made 36,000 years ago. What sparked this? Why here? Why now? One theory is that this explosion of art was a response to the stress of the Ice Age world. In a time of intense cold and dwindling resources, life was precarious. Perhaps these great, dangerous animals were not just animals. Perhaps they were the spirits of the world itself. Powerful, unpredictable beings whose favor had to be won. The cave, then, was a place of ritual, a place to communicate with these great powers, to ask for a successful hunt, to appease a spirit, to restore the balance of a fragile world. But there is another possibility. Perhaps this art was not about the outside world at all. Perhaps it was the first great flowering of the inner world, the birth of the modern human imagination. Imagine what it was like for the first time. You are a human, and you realize that you can create a world that does not exist. You can take the image of a lion from your memory, and with a piece of charcoal, give it a second life on the wall of a cave. You can make something that will last longer than you will. Something that can carry a story, a feeling, a memory, across time. This is a new kind of power, the power of the symbol. And this power was not just on the walls of the great caves. It was everywhere. It was in the music. At sites like Hohlfels in Germany, archaeologists have found flutes, exquisitely crafted from the bones of vultures and the ivory of mammoths. They have finger holes, carefully drilled to produce a specific scale of notes. These were not random whistles. They were sophisticated musical instruments, and they were made over 40,000 years ago. Let us try to hear that sound. You are sitting in a small, smoky shelter built from the bones of a mammoth. Outside, the wind of the Ice Age is howling, but inside, there is the warmth of the fire, and someone begins to play. A high, clear, and haunting melody played on the bone of a bird. A sound that is not the wind, not the call of an animal, but something new. A human sound. A sound made not for survival, but for the soul. A sound that could tell a story without words. A sound that could make you feel not so alone in the great, cold darkness. And they wore their stories on their bodies. This was the age of personal adornment. The simple seashell necklaces of Africa were joined by a dazzling new array of symbolic objects. Great, curving pendants carved from mammoth ivory. Thousands of tiny, polished beads, painstakingly drilled and sewn onto their clothing in intricate patterns. The pierced teeth of the Arctic fox, the wolf, the bear, worn as a sign of a hunter's power. This was not just decoration. This was a language. Your clothing, your ornaments, they told the world who you were, what clan you belonged to, what spirits you carried, what journeys you had made. Your body itself had become a canvas, a living, walking story. What drove this sudden, explosive need to create meaning? Perhaps it was the final encounter with the Neanderthals. Perhaps, in meeting another kind of human, we were forced, for the first time, to truly define ourselves, to ask the question, what makes us, us? And the answer was not in the shape of our tools, but in the shape of our dreams. The answer was art. The answer was music. The answer was the story. Or perhaps the spark was something deeper, a subtle, genetic shift in our brains, a rewiring of our neural pathways that allowed for a new kind of fluid, symbolic thought, the ability to connect the sound of a flute to the memory of a lost loved one, the ability to see the spirit of a lion in a swirl of black pigment on a rock, the ability to see a future self in a small, polished bead. This was the birth of the metaphorical mind, the mind that we still live with today. Whatever the cause, the world was forever changed. The longest walk had not just carried our bodies across the planet, it had carried our minds into a new, undiscovered country, a country of the imagination, and in that country we found a new kind of home, a home built not of bone or hide, but of meaning, a home that could be carried anywhere, a home that could never be lost to the rising seas or the melting ice, a home that we are still building today. But this new world of the mind was not a paradise. It was as full of shadows and of dangers as the frozen steppe outside. And as our ancestors filled the world with their art and their music and their stories, they also began to ask new and more difficult questions. Questions about life and death and what it means to be a human in a world that was still so vast and so unknown. And they would walk now, not just across the land, but across a great frozen bridge of ice, into the last and greatest of the empty continents. That great frozen bridge of ice was not a bridge at all. It was a world, a vast, lost continent, born from the cold that connected the old world to the new. Today, it lies drowned beneath the grey, icy waters of the Bering Strait. But for 20,000 years, during the coldest depths of the last ice age, this was a real and living place, a homeland. And it was here, in this forgotten heartland of the north, that a new kind of human culture was forged, a people who learned to live at the absolute edge of the possible. The people of Beringia. Their story is one of the great epics of human survival. It begins as our ancestors, having walked the entire length of Asia, finally arrived at its northeasternmost edge, the frozen coast of Siberia. This was the end of the line. Before them lay nothing but a vast, churning sea of pack ice. But the world was growing colder. The last great glaciation was reaching its peak, and as the great ice sheets of North America and Eurasia grew, they drank the oceans. The sea level fell by more than 100 meters, and the floor of the sea was revealed. Let us stand with them on the edge of this new world. You are standing on a cliff in what is now Siberia, the wind a constant, razor-sharp presence. You look to the east, across the frozen water, and you see a sight that no human has seen before or since. The horizon is not empty. It is land, a vast, open, and treeless plain that stretches as far as the eye can see. A new world rising from the sea. This was Beringia. At its greatest extent, it was a subcontinent, 1,000 miles wide from north to south. It was not a paradise. This was the heart of the Arctic cold, a polar desert swept by relentless dry winds that blew off the great glaciers to the south. But it was not a wasteland. This was a lost biome, a strange, cold, and surprisingly rich ecosystem known as the Mammoth Steppe. The ground was a dry, frozen tundra, covered not in snow, but in a tough, hardy carpet of grasses and herbs. And on this frozen grassland, the great herds of the Ice Age thrived. Woolly mammoths, their great, curving tusks sweeping aside the thin snow to find the frozen grass. Steppe bison, their shaggy coats thick against the wind. Wild horses, and vast, migrating herds of caribou. And the predators that followed them, the great dire wolves and the short-faced bears. For a people who knew how to hunt, this was a world of opportunity. And so, they walked out onto the floor of the sea. This was not a rapid migration. It was a slow, generational expansion into a new, unclaimed territory. For 10,000 years, this is where they stayed. Not just passing through, but living. Genetic evidence tells us a strange and beautiful story. The ancestors of the first Americans became isolated in Beringia for millennia, cut off from their relatives in Asia by the harsh Arctic deserts, and blocked from entering America by the great, impassable wall of the North American ice sheets. They were a people in waiting, a population marinating in isolation in the frozen heart of a lost continent. Archaeologists call this the Beringian standstill. And it was in this long, quiet period of isolation that a new people and a new culture were born. They were masters of the Arctic. They had to be. Survival here was a constant, relentless negotiation with the cold. Their entire existence was an art of warmth. Imagine what their lives were like. You live in a small, semi-subterranean house, dug into the permafrost to escape the wind. The walls are made of the bones of the mammoths you hunt. The roof, a dome of interlocking tusks and ribs, covered in a thick layer of stitched reindeer hides and insulated with sod. Inside, it is dark, smoky, and warm. A single, flickering stone lamp, its wick of moss fed with rendered seal or mammoth fat, is the only light. It is the center of your world. Your clothing is a masterpiece of engineering. Multiple layers of caribou and wolf hide, tanned to a supple softness, and stitched with a fine bone needle and thread of sinew. A hooded parka, leggings, mittens, boots, a second, wearable skin that allows you to move and work in a world where the temperature rarely rises above freezing. Every seam is a victory. Every stitch, a prayer against the cold. Your tools are small, beautiful, and deadly. You do not carry heavy hand axes. You carry a toolkit of microblades, tiny, razor-sharp flakes of stone, struck from a carefully prepared core. These are the components of a modular system. You set them into a groove in a handle of antler or bone, creating a serrated, replaceable blade for a knife or a spear. It is a technology of extreme efficiency for a people who could not afford to waste a single gram of weight or a single moment of effort. And you are a people of the hunt. Your entire year is a cycle of movement, following the great herds. You are not just a hunter. You are a part of the herd's story. You know their paths, their rhythms, their seasons. You know them so well that you can predict where they will be weeks from now, and you will be there, waiting. But this was more than just a story of survival. This was a world of the mind. The people of Beringia were the children of the great symbolic explosion. They carried with them the memory of art, of music, of ritual. At the site of Yana RHS in northern Siberia, on the western edge of Beringia, archaeologists found evidence of this rich inner world. Carved ivory, decorated tools, and a necklace of Arctic fox teeth. These were not just hunters, they were thinkers, dreamers, people who filled the long, dark Arctic nights with stories. And then, after 10,000 years of isolation in this sunken homeland, the way opened. The world began to warm. The great glaciers that had blocked the way into America began to melt, and a path appeared. Not one path, but two. An ice-free corridor opening up through the heart of the continent, and a coastal route, a kelp highway, emerging as the sea ice retreated from the shores of the Pacific. The long wait was over. The cage was unlocked. The people of Beringia, forged in the crucible of the Arctic cold, were now poised on the edge of the last great empty continent. They did not know what lay ahead. They only knew that the herds were moving south, and that the world was opening up. They were no longer the people of the standstill. They were about to become the first people of America. But the world they were leaving behind, their sunken homeland of Beringia, would not wait for them. As the glaciers melted, the seas began to rise, and their entire world, the heartland that had shaped them for 500 generations, was about to drown. A slow, inexorable flood that would erase their homes, their hunting grounds, and their memories from the face of the earth. The journey forward was not just a choice, it was an escape, from a world that was vanishing, forever, beneath the waves. That escape from a drowning world is one of the great, silent epics of our human story. For decades, we imagined it as a desperate journey on foot, a single, heroic rush of mammoth hunters pushing south through a narrow, treacherous corridor of melting ice, a world of gravel and wind and scarcity. But the land keeps its secrets, and the bones, when they speak, sometimes tell a different story. Sites began to appear in the Americas that were too old. Monte Verde, in the far south of Chile, with its wooden foundations and preserved footprints, dated to a time when the ice corridor should have still been a frozen, impassable wall. Paisley Caves in Oregon, with human DNA found in layers that predated the Great Melt. The evidence was pointing to a different kind of journey. A journey that did not wait for the ice to part. A journey that bypassed the frozen heart of the continent altogether. A journey made by water. This was the Kelp Highway. Not a road of ice and rock, but a living, vibrant path of water and life that stretched, almost unbroken, from the shores of Beringia all the way down the Pacific coast of the Americas. As the great glaciers began their slow retreat, the sea ice that had choked the coastline for millennia began to break up, and in its place, a rich new ecosystem was born. Great, underwater forests of kelp began to grow in the cold, nutrient-rich waters, and with the kelp came life. Seals, sea otters, and great, lumbering sea lions, vast flocks of seabirds, and a bounty of fish and shellfish. For a people who knew how to live from the sea, this was not a barrier. It was an invitation. Let us try to imagine what it was like to make that choice. You are one of the people of Beringia. Your world is the frozen steppe. Your life is the mammoth. But you can feel the world changing. The great herds are moving, their patterns becoming less predictable. And you can see the water rising at the edge of your homeland. Every year, the sea claims a little more of the land. But there is another world calling, the world of the coast. You stand on a cliff, and you look down at the sea. It is a world of incredible richness. You see the dark, sleek bodies of seals basking on the rocks. You see the plumes of whales far out on the horizon. The air is filled with the cries of birds, and at low tide the rocks are covered in a feast of mussels and limpets. This is a different kind of abundance from the one you have always known. It is not the mountain of meat from a single mammoth kill. It is a slow, steady, and reliable gift from the sea. And you have a technology that can unlock it. The boat. These were not great sailing ships. They were small, light, and incredibly tough watercraft. Umiaks, perhaps, made from the skins of seals or walruses, stretched over a light frame of driftwood and whalebone. They were buoyant, flexible, and perfectly suited for navigating the cold, rocky shores of the North Pacific. They were not a new invention. Your ancestors had likely used them for generations, for hunting seals along the coast of Beringia, but now they became something more. Not just a tool for the hunt, but a vessel for a journey. The migration down the kelp highway was not a single, desperate voyage. It was a slow, patient, and skillful leapfrog down the coastline. A band of people would load their skin boats with their tools, their children, and the embers of their fire, and they would travel south for a day or a week, staying within sight of the land. They were not sailing into the empty blue. They were following the green ribbon of the kelp forest. They would find a sheltered cove, a river mouth teeming with salmon, a bay rich with seals, and here they would stay, for a season, for a generation, until the call to move south began again. This was not a journey of desperation. It was a journey of expertise. These were not just hunters. They were mariners. They understood the rhythms of the tides, the patterns of the currents, the subtle language of the wind and the waves. They were a coastal people, as at home on the water as they were on the land. This is what it would have felt like. Your boat rises and falls on the long, gentle swell of the Pacific. To your right, the endless blue horizon of the sea. To your left, the coastline of a new world. A world of towering, snow-capped mountains, of great, silent forests of spruce and fir, of glaciers that still flowed down from the highlands, their blue ice carving into the sea with a sound like thunder. You are a traveller between two worlds, the world of the ice and the world of the water. The archaeological evidence for this journey is faint, and it is scattered. Most of it has been lost, swallowed by the same rising seas that had drowned their Beringian homeland. The coastal camps, the beachside hearths, the places where they pulled their boats ashore, they now lie 100 meters beneath the waves. But we find the whispers of their passage. In a cave on Prince of Wales Island in Alaska, the bones of a man who lived 16,000 years ago, his diet rich in the chemical signature of the sea. On the Channel Islands of California, the remains of a woman who lived 13,000 years ago, buried with the tools of a people who knew how to hunt the pygmy mammoths that lived on those islands, a feat that would have been impossible without a boat. These are the silent, lonely signposts of a lost coastal world. This journey explains the great mystery of the peopling of the Americas. It explains how our ancestors could have bypassed the great ice sheets. And it explains how they could have spread so far, so fast. A journey by boat is many times faster than a journey on foot. Following the rich, reliable resources of the coast, they could have travelled from Alaska to Chile in just a few thousand years. A mere blink of an eye in the long, slow story of our human past. And they were not just following the food. They were following a memory. The memory of a life lived at the edge of the sea. They were the children of the coast, and they were taking their world with them. They were not conquering a new continent. They were unrolling a familiar map upon a new shoreline. And as they travelled, they looked out at the strange new stars of the southern sky. And they must have told stories. Stories of the sunken homeland they had left behind, and stories of the great, empty continent that lay, quiet and waiting, just beyond the sound of the waves. A continent that had never known the sound of a human voice, but that was about to change, because the people of the water were about to step ashore, and their footprints would mark the beginning of the end of a world. Those first footprints on a new continent did not just mark the arrival of a new species. They marked the arrival of a new kind of consciousness. For the entire 3 million-year story of our human lineage, every step we had ever taken was in a world that was already old, a world shaped by the memories of our ancestors, a world where every river, every mountain, every cave already had a name and a story. But this was different. This was a world without a past. The people of the Kelp Highway did not remain on the coast forever. The great glacial walls of the interior were melting. The rivers that flowed from the dying ice sheets were carving paths into the heart of the continent. And these rivers were highways, invitations, pulling the coastal wanderers inland into a world that was vast and rich and utterly, profoundly empty of people. Let us try to feel what it was like to be one of them, to be a first-comer. You have left the familiar world of the sea behind you, and you are following a river inland. Your small band of kin are the only people you have seen for your entire life. And now, you walk for a day, for a week, for a month, and you see no one. You find no old hearths, no broken tools, no carvings on the rocks. The silence is absolute. There are no ghosts here, no ancestral spirits to guide you or to warn you. You are the first. This experience is something we can no longer comprehend. To be truly, completely, alone in a landscape, to know that every step you take is a step into a place that has no human memory. This was not a wilderness to be conquered. It was a silence to be filled. And it was a world of unbelievable abundance. The Americas had been a refuge for the great megafauna of the Ice Age, a continent that had never known the pressure of a human hunter. As our ancestors moved inland, they stepped into a living museum, a paradise of protein. Imagine what it was like to see them for the first time. You crest a small hill, and you look out over a wide, grassy plain. And the plain is moving. It is a herd of mammoths. Not the woolly mammoths of Beringia, but a new, larger species, the great Columbian mammoth. Hundreds of them, their great, domed heads moving like a forest of bone. And beside them, the mastodons, creatures of the spruce forests. Herds of wild horses, more numerous than any your ancestors had ever seen. Camels, with long, graceful necks. And the giants, the strange, impossible giants of this new world. The Glyptodon, a creature like a giant armadillo, the size of a small car, its body covered in a great, bony shell. And the ground sloths, monstrous, shaggy beings, some standing 6 meters tall, capable of pulling down the branches of trees with their great, clawed hands. These animals had no evolved fear of you. They would have looked at your small fur-clad figure with a kind of placid indifference. A fatal mistake. Because you were not just another animal. You were the inheritor of 3 million years of hunting knowledge. The most sophisticated and deadly predator the planet had ever produced. The first peoples of the Americas were specialists. They were big game hunters. Their entire culture, their entire identity, was built around the pursuit of these great beasts. And they had a weapon to match their ambition. A new technology, perhaps invented right here, in the heart of this new world. The Clovis point. This was not just a sharpened stone. It was a masterpiece of lethal design. A long, leaf-shaped spear point, crafted from high-quality flint or chert. And it had a distinctive feature. A long, shallow groove or flute running up from the base. This flute was not for decoration. It was an engineering solution. It allowed the point to be securely attached to a heavy spear shaft, creating a weapon that could withstand the immense impact of a thrust into the thick hide of a mammoth. The Clovis point was the signature of a people who had committed themselves, body and soul, to the hunt. And for a few, brief, glorious centuries, they were unbelievably successful. The evidence of their passage is found all across North America. From the frozen plains of Alaska to the deserts of Mexico, kill sites where the bones of a dozen mammoths lie scattered around a handful of broken Clovis points, caches of their magnificent blades buried as offerings, or perhaps as a hunter's emergency supply. The spread of the Clovis culture was a lightning-fast expansion, a testament to a people who had found a world perfectly suited to their skills. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. But what did it do to their minds? To live in a world without ancestors? A world where every story had to be invented? This is what it might have felt like. You are a storyteller, Back in the old world, in Beringia, the stories were ancient. They were the stories of the mammoth, of the wolf, of the great spirit of the cold. They were stories that had been passed down for 1,000 generations. But here, there are no old stories. The mountains have no names. The rivers have no spirits. The great, strange beasts of this land have no place in your cosmology. And so, you must begin again. You must create a new world of the mind, to match this new world of the land. You give a name to the river that gives you water. You tell a story about the mountain that looks like a sleeping giant. You watch the great, strange ground sloth, and you weave it into a new myth, a new song, a new memory. You are not just a hunter. You are a creator of worlds. You are the first ancestor, the person whose footprints all future stories will follow. This was a moment of incredible creative freedom, and perhaps of profound existential loneliness. To be the first is to be untethered from the past, to be the Adam and Eve of a new continent, and this experience, this unique psychological pressure, may have been what forged the incredible diversity and richness of the cultures that would later arise in the Americas. They were all born from this single, shared experience. The experience of filling a great silence. But this world of giants, this hunter's paradise, was a fragile thing, and it was not to last. The footprints of the first people were the footprints of a coming storm. They were walking into a world that was already dying. The same great thaw that had allowed them to enter the continent was now unmaking the very ecosystems that sustained the great herds. And the arrival of a new, deadly predator may have been the final, decisive blow. The silence they had found was about to be replaced by a different kind of silence. The silence of extinction. And the story of the first footprints is also the story of the last. The last time any human would ever look upon a living mammoth on the wild, open plains of a new world. That last look upon a living mammoth was the end of a world. The hunter's paradise, the land of giants that the first comers had discovered, was a brief and beautiful dream. And its waking was a quiet and then deafening silence. The arrival of our species in the Americas was not just the beginning of a new human story. It was the final, tragic chapter in a story that was millions of years old. The story of the great beasts. The extinction that followed was not a slow, gentle fading. It was a biological blitzkrieg. In the space of just 1,000 to 2,000 years, a mere heartbeat in geological time, more than 75% of North America's large animal species vanished from the face of the earth. The Columbian mammoths and the mastodons, the ground sloths, some as large as elephants, the horses and camels that had evolved here, the glyptodonts, the giant armadillos, and the great predators that hunted them, the saber-toothed cats, with their terrifying knife-like canines, the giant short-faced bears, and the dire wolves. All gone. Forever. What happened? What terrible force could unmake a world so quickly? For a century the answer seemed simple, and the culprit was us. This is the overkill hypothesis. The theory that the first Americans, the hyper-efficient Clovis hunters, were so deadly, and the native megafauna so naive, that our ancestors simply swept across the continent in a wave of destruction, hunting the great beasts into oblivion. Let us try to imagine what this would have looked like. You are a Clovis hunter, and you are part of a world that feels limitless. The herds of mammoth are so vast, they seem to stretch to the horizon. Your spear, tipped with its fluted point, is the most advanced weapon on the planet. Your people are masters of the cooperative hunt. And the animals, they do not yet know how to fear you. It was, for a time, a golden age for the hunter. But it was a golden age that was burning its own future as fuel. The archaeological evidence is tantalizing. At kill sites across the continent, from Arizona to Florida, we find the same haunting signature. The bones of a mammoth, or 2, or 10, lying in a jumble, and scattered among them, the broken, discarded, and exquisitely crafted Clovis points that brought them down. These sites are a snapshot of a successful hunt, but they are also a crime scene, the silent testimony of a one-sided war, a war that the giants could not win. But is that the whole story? Was our species alone that destructive? Or were we just the final, decisive blow in a world that was already coming apart? The other great suspect in this mystery is the climate. The arrival of humans in the Americas coincided with a period of wild, chaotic climate change. The Great Thaw was not a smooth, gentle warming. It was a violent seesaw of temperature swings. And the most violent of all was the Younger Dryas, the great cold snap that plunged the northern hemisphere back into a deep freeze for over 1,000 years. This sudden, brutal return to near-glacial conditions would have devastated the ecosystems of the Americas. The forests that had begun to grow withered and died. The grasslands that sustained the great herds changed their composition. The world of the giants was already under immense stress. Their habitats were shrinking. Their food sources were disappearing. They were a people on the brink. And then, a new, deadly predator appeared on the landscape. Us. Today, most scientists believe that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It was not just the hunters. It was not just the climate. It was a perfect and perfectly deadly storm. A synergy of pressures that the megafauna could not withstand. The climate delivered the first blow, weakening the herds, fragmenting their populations. And our ancestors, the Clovis hunters, delivered the final, fatal one. A 1-2 punch of climate change and human predation that knocked the giants off the stage of evolution forever. The consequences of this loss were profound. It was not just the animals that vanished. It was the entire world that they had created. The mammoths and mastodons were not just inhabitants of the landscape. They were its architects. Their grazing maintained the open grasslands. Their great weight compacted the soil. Their droppings fertilized the earth. When they vanished, the landscape itself transformed. The grasslands gave way to dense, impassable forests of spruce and fir. The very shape and feel of the American continent was remade, and the people were forced to change with it. The Clovis culture, so beautifully and so fatally specialized for the mammoth hunt, disappeared. The great, continent-spanning network of hunters fractured. The single, unified focus of their world was gone. And in its place, 1,000 new worlds were born. As the forests grew and the giants vanished, people were forced to adapt. They learned to hunt the smaller, faster animals of the new woodlands. The deer, the elk, the bison. They learned to fish in the rivers, to gather nuts and seeds, to rely on a wider, more varied, and more localized menu. The age of the specialist was over. The age of the generalist had begun. This is the birth of the Archaic period in North America, a time of incredible cultural diversification. The single, monolithic Clovis culture was replaced by a mosaic of different peoples, each with their own unique tools, their own unique traditions, their own unique way of being. This was not a decline. It was a flowering, but it was a flowering that grew from a graveyard. A new human world, built upon the bones of the old one. But what did it feel like to be the people who lived through this? To be the children or the grandchildren of the great mammoth hunters? To grow up with the stories of the giants, but to live in a world where they were only a memory? Imagine this. You are an elder, and you are sitting by the fire with the children of your band. And you tell them a story of a time, not so long ago, when the earth shook with the footsteps of the great beasts. A story of your own grandfather, a hero who faced a mammoth with nothing but a spear and his courage. The children listen, their eyes wide with a kind of wonder and a kind of sadness, because they will never see what you have seen. They will never know the awe and the terror of a world that was truly alive with giants. Your story is a eulogy, a farewell, a memory of a world that is now and forever lost. This sense of a great and tragic loss, a world that was unmade, may be one of the deepest and most enduring legacies of the first Americans. The price of their arrival was the end of the very world they had come to conquer. It is a quiet and haunting paradox, and it is a story that has been repeated again and again as our species has spread across the planet, an echo of our own terrible and creative power, our power to make new worlds and to unmake old ones. And as the last of the great glaciers melted and the seas rose to their modern levels, our ancestors stood, for the first time, in a world that was no longer ruled by ice or by giants. It was a world that was, for better and for worse, becoming our own. And the great, chaotic, and final act of the Ice Age was about to begin. The Great Thaw. That great thaw was not a gentle spring. It was a planetary fever, a violent, chaotic, and world-breaking transformation. For 100,000 years, the ice had been the only constant. It was the wall at the edge of the world, the source of the endless wind, the silent, white god that had shaped every living thing. And then it began to weep. The same cosmic rhythm that had pushed the world into its deep freeze now pulled it back toward warmth. The northern summers grew stronger, and the great ice sheets, which had seemed so eternal, so absolute, began to rot from within. The end of the Ice Age was not a smooth, gradual melt. It was a catastrophe of water. The great glaciers, 2 or 3 kilometers thick, did not simply shrink. They collapsed. Vast, churning rivers of meltwater began to flow on, under and through the ice, carving great, groaning tunnels in their blue hearts. At their edges, they poured forth in torrents that dwarfed any river we know today. And sometimes the water was held back. Great, temporary lakes would form at the edge of the retreating glaciers, their shores made of rotting, unstable ice. The most famous of these was Lake Agassiz in North America, a body of water larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. It was a bomb made of water with a fuse made of melting ice, and periodically the fuse would burn through. Let us try to imagine what that moment was like. You are a hunter, and your people have lived in the shadow of the great ice wall for generations. You have learned its rhythms, its groans, its silences. But one day, there is a new sound, a deep, cracking roar that is not thunder. It is a sound that seems to come from the very heart of the world. And then, you see it. The ice wall on the horizon gives way. A wave of water, hundreds of meters high, a churning, grey wall of ice and mud and shattered trees bursts forth. It is a flood of such impossible scale that you have no name for it. It is the end of the world. These megafloods, bursting from glacial lakes, scoured the continents down to bedrock. They carved the great canyons of the American West. They washed away entire ecosystems in a matter of days. And all of that water, every drop, eventually found its way to the sea, and the oceans began to rise. This was not the gentle, creeping tide of a summer beach. During the most intense periods of the melt, the sea level rose by meters in a single century. It was a rise so fast it would have been visible, year by year, a slow-motion drowning of the entire world. The familiar coastlines that had sustained people for generations, the rich estuaries, the sheltered bays, the tidal flats teeming with shellfish, they were all being swallowed. The journey to the sea became a journey of retreat. Imagine this. Your grandfather's grandfather was born in a camp by a great, curving bay. Your grandfather was born in a camp on a low hill that looked out over that same bay. Your father was born in a camp, further inland, on a high ridge. And from that ridge, on a clear day, you could still see the waters of the bay shimmering in the distance. Now you stand on that same ridge, and the water is at your feet. The entire world of your ancestors, their homes, their hearths, the places where they buried their dead, is gone. A silent, underwater graveyard. A memory that now belongs to the sea. This is the story of every coastal people on Earth during this time. This is the story of Doggerland, the great, green heartland of Ice Age Europe, which had connected Britain to the continent, began to flood. First, its rivers swelled, turning its low-lying plains into a vast swampland. Then, the sea crept in. Slowly, inexorably, Doggerland was transformed from a vast plain into a great bay, then into an archipelago of drowning hills, and then nothing. Just the grey, cold waters of the North Sea. The people who lived there, a people we can call the land-lost, were forced into a retreat that lasted for 5,000 years. Their entire history, their entire memory of a place, was being washed away. And this is the story of Beringia, the great sunken homeland of the first Americans. The vast, grassy steppe that had been their world for 10,000 years was drowned. The path they had taken, the long walk that had led them into a new world, was severed. They were cut off, stranded, the children of a land that no longer existed. Is it any wonder that the story of a great, world-ending flood is one of the most universal and persistent myths in all of human culture? The story of Noah, of Manu, of a handful of survivors on a boat, in a world reborn from water. Perhaps this is not a myth. Perhaps it is a memory, a distant, distorted, and deeply traumatic memory of a real event. A memory of the great Thaw, a memory of the time when the world of our ancestors was literally and terrifyingly drowned. The chaos of the Thaw did not just remake the map of the world, it remade the climate. The great floods of fresh, cold meltwater pouring into the North Atlantic periodically disrupted the ocean currents that regulated the planet's temperature. This caused the warming to stutter, to stop, and even to reverse. The younger Dryas, that final brutal winter that returned from the dead, was a product of this chaos. For the humans who had just begun to adapt to a warmer world, it was a 1,000-year-long lesson in the fragility of life. And with the chaos came the final end of the giants. The mammoth steppe was disappearing. The climate was now warm and wet, and the trees were returning. Great, dense forests of birch and pine grew up where once there had been only grass. For the mammoths, the rhinos, the giant bison, this was the end. Their world was vanishing. Their food was gone. And their long, slow, 200,000-year-long conversation with the ice was finally over. And with their passing, a human way of life ended. The cultures that had been built around the mammoth, their rituals, their stories, their very identity, had lost their center. Their gods were dead. And the people who had been the masters of the frozen world now had to learn to be something new. They had to learn to be the people of the forest, the people of the river, the people of a world that was no longer ruled by ice or by giants, but by the quiet, green, and relentless rhythms of a new age, the age that would become our own, the Holocene. But the Thaw left behind one final, profound legacy. It was not a memory of trauma, but one of resilience. The people who survived this planetary catastrophe were not the strongest. They were the most adaptable, the most creative, the most social. They were the ones who had learned that when the world changes, you must change with it. When the land drowns, you learn to sail. When the giants vanish, you learn to hunt the deer. And when the darkness falls, you learn to make your own light. This was the great lesson of the cold. And as our ancestors stood, blinking in the light of a new sun, on the first day of a world reborn, they were about to build 1,000 new worlds in its place. Those 1,000 new worlds were not built in a day. They grew slowly, organically, from the seeds of the old one. The longest walk was over. The great migrations had reached the ends of the earth, and for the first time in our history, the human story was no longer a single braided river, flowing in one general direction. It was a delta, a great branching network of 1,000 different streams, each finding its own path, its own rhythm, its own unique way of being human. The 10,000 years that followed the end of the Ice Age was a time of quiet and of profound creative fragmentation. Humanity, now scattered across every habitable continent, began to diverge. The great, unifying pressure of the ice was gone, and in its place came a new kind of world, a world of local climates, local ecosystems, local challenges, and local solutions. This is the age that archaeologists call the Mesolithic, or the Middle Stone Age, but it is better understood as the Great Adaptation. A time when our species, having proven it could survive a global catastrophe, now had to prove it could live in 1,000 different kinds of paradise. Let us stand for a moment in one of those new worlds. The great, silent pine forests of post-glacial northern Europe. The mammoths are gone. The open steppe is a memory. The world is now a dense, green tangle of trees. And you are a person of the forest. Your entire world is shaped by the wood. You build your shelters not from bone, but from the supple branches of the birch. You hunt not the great, slow-moving herds, but the small, fleet-footed red deer, the wild boar, the elusive elk. Your tools are different. The great, heavy spears of the mammoth hunt are gone. In their place, you have something new. The bow and arrow, a technology of silence, of stealth, of a single perfect shot. You have a new companion, the dog, the descendant of the Ice Age wolves, who chose not to fear our fires. Here, in the dense forest, the dog is not just a companion. It is an extension of your own senses. Its nose can track a deer through the thickest undergrowth. Its ears can hear the snap of a twig 100 meters away. You and the dog, you hunt together. A partnership of two different kinds of predator, two different kinds of mind. This was the world of the Maglemosian culture, the people of the northern forests. And their world was just one of 1,000. On the coasts of the Atlantic, from Portugal to Scotland, other peoples were living a different kind of life. They were the people of the sea. They lived in great shell middens, vast mounds of discarded shells that grew over centuries, creating hills of human memory. Their lives were governed by the tide. They built great, complex fish traps in the estuaries, and they travelled in dugout canoes, their paddles slicing through the cold, grey waters of the Atlantic. In the deserts of the Middle East, a different story was unfolding. Here, in the Fertile Crescent, the descendants of the Ice Age survivors were learning a new and dangerous magic. They were learning to partner not just with animals, but with plants. They were the Natufians, the first people to begin the slow, patient dance of cultivation. They were not yet farmers, but they were the people who were inventing the idea of home. And in the Americas, the children of the first comers were spreading out across two vast and wildly diverse continents. In the Great Plains, they were learning to hunt the great herds of bison, their lives a nomadic echo of their mammoth hunting past. In the great river valleys of the east, they were learning the secrets of the forest, and in the high Andes of the south, they were learning to live in the thin air of the mountains. Everywhere you look in this period, you see the same pattern. Intense, creative, and brilliant adaptation to a local world. The single, shared culture of the Ice Age had fractured into a kaleidoscope of human possibilities, and with this cultural divergence came a linguistic one. The languages of the world began to bloom. We do not know what the people of the Ice Age spoke. Perhaps a single, ancestral tongue carried across the world. But now, in these small, isolated, and creative communities, that single tongue began to change, to drift, to evolve. New words for new plants, new names for new gods, new rhythms of speech for new ways of life. The great, branching tree of human language began to grow its first, new leaves. But this world of 1,000 small, isolated worlds was not a paradise of perfect peace. The end of the Ice Age did not mean the end of violence. In fact, in many places, it may have increased. As populations grew, and as people became more tied to specific, resource-rich territories, the potential for conflict grew. At sites like Jebel Sahaba, on the banks of the Nile, a cemetery dated to this period contains the bodies of men, women, and children, many with stone projectile points still embedded in their bones. This was not a single violent event. It was a long, slow story of endemic warfare, a world of boundaries, and of the deadly cost of crossing them. This, too, was part of the Great Adaptation, learning not just how to live in a new world, but how to live with each other, how to negotiate, how to trade, and sometimes, how to fight. But even with this shadow of violence, the 10,000 years after the ice was a period of incredible, explosive, human creativity. It was a time of quiet invention. The canoe, the bow and arrow, the fish hook, pottery. These were the technologies that would build the modern world. And they were all invented, not in great cities or empires, but in small, scattered, and anonymous communities of hunter-gatherers and first farmers. People who were simply and brilliantly solving the problems of their own small, local worlds. Imagine what it was like to be alive in this time. You are born into a world that feels as if it has always been this way. A world of green forests, of warm sun, of predictable seasons. The stories the elders tell, of a great endless winter, of a world of ice and giants, they feel like myths, like dreams. Your world is a small, intimate place. The valley of your birth, the river that gives you fish, the forest that gives you deer. This is the entire universe. And it feels stable, permanent, safe. This feeling, this new, profound sense of stability, was perhaps the greatest gift of the great Thaw. It was a psychological revolution. The end of the ancient, existential anxiety of the ice. The feeling that the world could be trusted again. And in this new, safe and predictable world, the human mind was free to do what it does best. To play, to experiment, to create, to build 1,000 new, beautiful and complex worlds in the ruins of the old one. These were the people who would become the ancestors of us all. The Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Chinese, the Maya, the great civilizations of the ancient world were all born from these small, scattered Mesolithic seeds. But the story of humanity was about to take another, strange and irreversible turn. A turn that would be born from a single revolutionary idea. The idea that you did not have to find your food, you could grow it. The world of the hunter was about to give way to the world of the farmer. And the journey into our modern world, with its cities, its crowds, its glories, and its sorrows, was about to begin. But its roots are all here, in the quiet, creative, and forgotten genius of the people who survived the Thaw. The genius of those people who survived the Thaw is not a memory. It is an inheritance. The longest walk did not end 10,000 years ago, when the great ice sheets made their final retreat. It never ended, because the journey was not just a line drawn across a map of the world. It was a story written into the deepest and most ancient text of all, the human genome, and we are the living pages of that story. The final, and perhaps most profound, chapter of this great migration is not found in the dust of a cave floor or in the scattered stones of a long-abandoned camp. It is found inside you, in the quiet, microscopic, and vibrant world of your own cells. Modern genetics has given us a new kind of archaeology, a way to read the past not through bones, but through blood, a way to follow the footsteps of our ancestors, by tracing the faint genetic echoes they left behind in us. Let us, for a moment, take a journey into this inner world. Imagine you could unspool the DNA from a single one of your cells. Imagine you could stretch it out. A great, shimmering thread of information, 3 billion letters long. This is not just a biological blueprint for your eyes, your hair, your skin. This is a history book. A picaresque, a story told in a language of 4 simple letters, A, T, C, and G. And in the subtle patterns of that language, in the tiny, unique variations that make you, is the entire epic story of the longest walk. Somewhere in that long, winding text is the memory of the cradle, the incredible genetic diversity of the peoples of Africa, a living library of our species' deep history, a quiet testament to the 100,000 years we spent as a small African species before the great journey began. We are all Africans, and the map of our oldest home is still the first chapter in our blood. And then there is the mark of the great bottleneck, a moment during the long dry when our species was pushed to the brink of extinction. That near-death experience is still visible in our DNA. The genetics of all non-African peoples show a startling lack of diversity compared to their African relatives. This is the signature of a founder effect, the proof that all of us, every single person from Paris to Beijing to Patagonia, are the descendants of that single small band of people who made the final successful walk out of Africa. We are the children of the survivors, the inheritors of a single, fragile, and unbelievably lucky lineage. And the story continues. As our ancestors walked across the world, they did not just leave footprints. They left a genetic trail. Scientists can now trace the path of the great migrations by following the faint, statistical signals of specific genetic markers. We can see the path of the southern dispersal, a great, sweeping arc of genetic similarity that follows the coastlines of the Indian Ocean. We can see the genetic echo of the Beringian standstill, a unique cluster of mutations that links the peoples of Siberia to the first peoples of the Americas. The great journeys of our ancestors are no longer a matter of speculation. They are a statistical certainty, a map that we all carry within us. But this map does not just show our own journey. It shows the journeys of the people we met along the way, the ghosts, the other humans. Imagine you could scan your own genome for these ancient echoes. If you are of European or Asian descent, you would find it. A small but significant percentage of your DNA, around 1 to 3%, that is not from Homo sapiens. It is from them, the Neanderthals. This is not a metaphor. This is a biological reality. You are a hybrid, and these are not just silent, junk genes. They are active, working parts of you. The Neanderthal genes we carry are often related to our immune system, our skin, our hair. They are the 40,000-year-old gift of the cousins in the cold, a piece of their resilience, their adaptation to the European world, that they gave to us. The next time you get a cold and your body fights it off, you may be thanking a Neanderthal ancestor. And the story is deeper still. If you are from Tibet, or Melanesia, or Australia, your genome holds another ghost, the Denisovans. The high-altitude adaptation of the Tibetan people, the unique immune responses of the peoples of Papua New Guinea, these are a direct inheritance from the other mysterious human species of Asia. The story of our encounters with these lost peoples is not just a tale of conflict or replacement. It is a story of connection, a story of love, a story that is still alive and still at work in the quiet, cellular world within our bodies. And there are other, fainter ghosts as well. Mysterious, unnamed lineages that have left their fingerprints in the DNA of West Africans and South Asians. The more we look, the more we realize that the human family tree is not a tree at all. It is a great, tangled, and beautiful braid. A web of connections, of meetings, of minglings. A story that is far richer and far stranger than we ever imagined. This is the great, humbling lesson of the genetic age. It has taught us that we are not, and have never been, a pure and separate species. We are a mosaic, a choir of ancient voices, and the story of the longest walk is not just the story of our own survival. It is the story of the ghosts we carry with us, the cousins we have not forgotten, because their memory is a part of our own. So, the next time you look in the mirror, know that you are looking at more than just a face. You are looking at a map, a living archive of 100,000 years of human history. In the shape of your eyes, the texture of your hair, the subtle, invisible workings of your immune system, is the entire epic story. The memory of the African savanna, the echo of the long dry, the footprint of the first person to step onto a new continent, the ghost of a Neanderthal who shared a fire with one of your ancestors on a cold European night. All of it is in you. The journey is not over. It is not a story of the past. It is the story of us. And the walker, the restless, curious, and resilient spirit that carried our ancestors across the world, is still walking, in the quiet and in the mirror. That walker in the mirror is not a stranger. The face that stares back at you is the final destination of a journey that began 200,000 years ago. The story of the longest walk is not just a map written in our blood. It is a psychological inheritance, a way of being in the world, a restless, curious, and profoundly adaptable spirit that was forged on that great globe-spanning journey. And it is the part of us that is still walking today. The world our ancestors were born into was a small one. For millennia, the entire human universe was a single continent. Their mental maps were of local valleys, familiar rivers, and the territories of known kin. But the longest walk shattered that world. It was a journey that, by necessity, transformed a local species into a planetary one, and in doing so, it rewired our minds. The people who survived that journey were not the strongest or the fastest. They were the most adaptable, the most curious, the ones who were not afraid of the horizon. The ones who, upon arriving at the edge of a new, unknown sea, did not turn back, but began to gather bamboo. This is not just a story of physical endurance. It is a story of a certain kind of mind, a mind that is comfortable with uncertainty, a mind that sees a new landscape not as a threat, but as a question, a mind that is, in its deepest essence, an explorer. We are all the descendants of those explorers, and that legacy is still alive in us. It is the quiet and often unsettling restlessness that sits at the heart of the modern human experience. Let us feel that restlessness for a moment. You are sitting in a comfortable room. You are safe. You are warm. You are fed. By every metric of survival, you have won the game. And yet, there is a feeling, a vague, unnamed longing for something more, a desire to see what is over the next hill, a curiosity about what is happening on the other side of the world, a strange and sometimes overwhelming urge to simply go, to walk, to travel, to move. Where does this feeling come from? It is not a modern invention. It is not the product of our globalized, hyper-connected world. It is the opposite. It is the ancient, primal echo of the walker, the ghost of the journey, still whispering in our bones. For 99% of our history, to be human was to be in motion. Our minds, our bodies, our very souls were shaped by the rhythm of the walk, and a part of us has never forgotten that rhythm. The modern world is a world of stillness. We live in permanent homes, work in stationary buildings, and travel in sealed boxes. We have, in the space of a few thousand years, brought the longest walk to an abrupt and final halt. And we are suffering from the consequences. The anxiety, the depression, the sense of disconnection that defines so much of modern life. Is this not, in some small way, a kind of homesickness? A homesickness for the road. A deep biological craving for a world that is not so small, so safe, so predictable. A longing for the horizon. This is the walker in the mirror. It is the part of you that is still adapted to a world of movement, of challenge, of the unknown. It is the part of you that feels a deep, primal satisfaction in learning a new skill, in solving a difficult problem, in navigating a new city, These are the modern echoes of the ancient challenges, the mental muscles that were developed to find a path through a new forest, or to understand the language of a new set of animal tracks. We are a species that is hardwired to learn, because, for the people of the longest walk, learning was survival. And this is the part of you that feels the most alive when you are in a community. The journey across the world was not a solo expedition. It was the work of a small, tightly bonded, and mutually dependent band of people. The trust, the cooperation, the shared stories, these were not just social graces. They were the technology that allowed us to survive. Our deep, and often painful, need for belonging, our fear of isolation, this is not a weakness. It is the memory of the band. The ancient, cellular knowledge that a lone human was a dead human. The walker in the mirror is a social being. And finally, the walker in the mirror is a dreamer. The people of the longest walk did not just navigate the physical world. They navigated a world of the mind. They filled the great, silent emptiness of the new continents with stories, with names, with myths, with gods. They took the raw, chaotic data of the world, and they wove it into a web of meaning. This impulse to tell stories, to find a pattern in the chaos, to create a universe of our own making. This is perhaps the most profound legacy of the journey. We are the descendants of the people who learned to make a home, not just in a cave, but in a story. So, when we look at the great achievements of our modern world, our art, our science, our cities, our technologies, it is easy to believe that we have left the Stone Age far behind, that we have become something new. But perhaps these are just the latest expressions of a very old impulse. The same restless, curious spirit that drove the first walkers out of their cradle is the spirit that now drives us to explore the stars. The same mind that learned to read the subtle signs of a new ecosystem is the mind that now reads the subtle language of quantum physics. The same hands that learned to craft a boat from skin and bone are the hands that now craft the silicon heart of a computer. We have not left the journey behind. We are simply walking a different kind of path. The longest walk is not over. It has just become internal, a journey into the vast and still largely unexplored continent of our own consciousness. But the walker in the mirror is also a warning. It reminds us of what we have lost. The deep, intuitive connection to the natural world, the slow, patient rhythms of a life lived in motion, the profound and life-saving intimacy of the small band. It reminds us that we are a creature of the wild, who is now trying to live in a cage of our own making. And the bars of that cage are comfort and safety and predictability. The walker in the mirror looks at our modern world, and it is not impressed. It is restless. It is hungry. It is longing for the horizon, and it is asking us a quiet and persistent question. A question that echoes from the heart of our own ancient and unforgotten past. Is this it? Is this the world that we walked so far to build? Is this the end of the road? Or is the journey still waiting to begin? Because the longest walk was never about a destination. It was never about arriving at the final shore or the last empty valley. It was a process, a slow and often unconscious unfolding of a question that sits at the very heart of the human spirit, the question of what lies just beyond. The story of our great migration is not a closed chapter in a history book. It is a living, breathing presence in the world we have made, and in the lives we are living right now. The world, in the end, was not a cage. It was a path. And the great discovery of our ancestors was that the path did not have an end. It was a circle, a journey that led them all the way around the world, and eventually back to themselves. Today, there are no more empty continents to discover. The great physical frontiers of the planet have been mapped and named and settled. The age of the first footprints is over. But the walker is still inside us, and the journey has simply changed its form. The scientist in a laboratory, pushing at the boundaries of our knowledge of the universe, is a walker. The artist in a studio, exploring the vast, unmapped territory of the human imagination, is a walker. The person who leaves their childhood home to build a new life in a new city is a walker. Every time we learn a new skill, a new language, a new way of seeing the world, we are taking a step on that same ancient path. The longest walk is not a story of the past. It is the story of every human life, a journey from the known into the unknown. Let us feel that journey for a final moment. Imagine yourself as a child. The world is a small, safe, and familiar place. It is the world of your home, your family, your kin, and then you take your first step, out the door, down the path, into the world, and the world begins to grow. You meet new people, you learn new stories, you see new places. You are walking. There are moments of fear, of uncertainty, of being lost in a world that feels too large, too strange, too complex. These are the deserts and the oceans of your own personal journey. The moments when you feel the echo of your ancestor, standing on the shore of a new continent, the taste of salt and fear in their mouth. And there are moments of discovery, of wonder, of a sudden, breathtaking expansion of your world. The moment you fall in love, the moment you solve a problem that seemed impossible, the moment you create something beautiful that did not exist before. These are the green valleys, the rich hunting grounds, the moments of arrival, the moments when you feel the echo of your ancestor, cresting a hill and seeing a new, unclaimed world spread out before them. This is the rhythm of our lives, a constant, and often unconscious, reenactment of the great journey, a dance between the safety of the known and the irresistible call of the unknown, between the cradle and the horizon. And what did our ancestors find? At the end of their long walk, they did not find a final paradise. They did not find an end to struggle or to sorrow. They found the world in all its beautiful and terrifying complexity. And they found each other. They walked so far and for so long that they eventually circled the entire planet. And in doing so, they wove the first, fragile threads of a single, global, human family. That is the true legacy of the longest walk. It was not a journey of conquest. It was a journey of connection, a slow and often painful stitching together of our scattered and wandering species. A journey that is still unfinished. A story that we are still writing every day, with our own small and brave and hopeful steps. So, the next time you feel that quiet inner restlessness, that longing for something more, do not be afraid of it. It is not a flaw. It is your oldest and most noble inheritance. It is the voice of the walker in the mirror, the whisper of the ancestor who stood at the edge of the world and chose not to turn back. The part of you that knows that a home is not just a place to stay, it is a place to start from. The longest walk is the story of how we became a global species, but it is also a story that reminds us of where we came from. A single, small band of people in a single African valley. A single family. We are the children of the journey, and the path is still open. The journey never ends. Thank you, fellow walker, for joining me on this long and quiet journey, for following the first footprints, and for listening to the echo of a story that is still being told. If this journey helped you find a little bit of stillness, a little bit of wonder, or simply helped you step out of the noise for a while, I am grateful you were here. Perhaps a single image from this story stayed with you. The first flicker of a new fire, the ghost of a green Arabia, the silence of an empty continent, or the faint genetic echo of a cousin in the cold. If a memory is with you now, feel free to leave it in the comments below as a quiet offering, a shared footprint on a path that we are all still walking together. Until the next story begins, as always, stay curious, stay thoughtful,